Expand. Boom! Wang Tengfei's eyes were crimson as he launched a full-force attack, which slammed into Meng Hao, causing blood to spray out of his mouth. Despite the fact that Wang Tengfei was likewise hit with a backlash attack, he didn't seem to care. Roaring, he flew back to attack again. So you also know mountains have no worries, till struck by snowy flurries, waters feel no woe, till the winds gust and blow. The stabbing pain Wang Tengfei felt in his heart was not any less than Meng Hao's. He had loved Chu Yuyan from the very beginning, and that had never changed. However, he had been too proud. Back in the early days, his pride had allowed him to turn a blind eye to her. He thought that if he could just defeat Meng Hao, if he could somehow get stronger and stronger, then it would be possible to sacrifice everything else, including Chu Yuyan. But when he lost everything, he finally realized, to his bitterness, that he truly had nothing. From that moment on, he began to wish that Chu Yuyan could simply be happy and live a life of laughter and smiles. Many years went by, and he believed himself to have forgotten his love from the past. But then one day he emerged from secluded meditation to hear from his fellow clan members about what was happening with Chu Yuyan. He had then done everything in his power to come here. In the moment he arrived, he saw Meng Hao, then completely lost control and exploded with violence. "If you didn't care about her, then why did you have to steal her from me?" "Menghao," roaring, Wang Tengfei attacked again. Meng Hao didn't respond. He stood there trembling, his heart in pieces. Wang Tengfei's words slammed into him like bolts of lightning. He didn't raise a hand to fight back. Wang Tengfei battered him with one fist after another. In Meng Hao's mind, this was all his fault. The debt he owed was too profound, and he felt deep regret. He regretted everything from the past, and now knew the mistakes he had made. He had never realized how deeply, how severely he had affected others. "I'm sorry," he murmured bitterly. Although the words were spoken quietly, when Wang Tengfei heard them, he stopped in place. His fists dropped to his sides and he began to weep. Meng Hao walked back to the coffin and looked at the beautiful Chu Yuyan laying there as if slumbering. Tears streaming down his face, he reached up and gently touched her forehead with his right hand. The tears rolled off his face, dropping down onto Chu Yuyan's cheek. A moment later, he looked up at Pill Demon and the ancient old man hovering next to him in midair. "There's something off about Chu Yuyan's death. Tell me why immediately," he spoke slowly, one word at a time, and by the time he reached the final words, his voice boomed deafeningly, causing colors to flash in the sky and a sweeping wind to spring up. The entire Kunlun society began to shake violently. As he spoke, his cultivation base exploded with power, pushing him to the point where he could slaughter Dao Realm cultivators. Right now, he could cut down one essence Dao Realm experts, could cause 2 essences cultivators to tremble, and could even take on 3 essences Dao Lords. Pill Demon gaped in astonishment and turned to look at the ancient man next to him. That old man had not mentioned anything suspicious about Chu Yuyan's death. Pill Demon had assumed that it was because, after reaching immortal ascension, Chu Yuyan's foundation was unstable, which led to the dispersal of her soul. Pill Demon wasn't the only one to stare in shock. Wang Tengfei's eyes went wide, and the surrounding Kunlun society disciples all looked up at the old man, astonished. This old man was one of the patriarchs of the Kunlun society. He looked down at Meng Hao and sighed. He had long since heard about how powerful Meng Hao was, but now that he could see it for himself, he realized that Meng Hao was able to see the clues on Chu Yuyan's corpse. "Her spiritual soul is lost. When she returned last time, she seemed normal, but the truth of the matter was that she had already lost her spiritual soul. The only thing that remained behind was her physical soul. She could only last for so long in such a state. Without the support of her spiritual soul, in the end, her physical soul dispersed. That is why she died, and is also why I was unable to reverse the situation and resurrect her." The old man spoke in a low voice and uttered no lies. He went on to explain the full process of how he had attempted to treat Chu Yuyan. Meng Hao was trembling. Because of the level of his cultivation base, he was well aware of the ramifications of a person losing their spiritual soul. With only the physical soul remaining, one had no foundation, and at any time, that person could lose touch with reality and begin to disperse into death. From the moment Chu Yuyan had returned, she had begun to weaken. With every day that passed, she struggled against death, but unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing she could do. She could only wait until her physical soul dispersed, and the day of her death arrived. She knew that she was dying and therefore had sent that final message to Meng Hao. "Meng Hao, I hope that you and Su Qing can have a safe and peaceful life together." Meng Hao's eyes were completely bloodshot, and he shook from the increasingly intense pain in his heart. Based on how high his cultivation base was, it was easy for him to inspect Chu Yuyan's corpse and confirm that what the old man had said was no lie. Her spiritual soul is lost. Well, where did it go? Meng Hao's eyes were filled with madness. He knew that all of this was caused because Chu Yuyan had helped him in the windswept realm, leading to her serious injuries. However, although her soul had been in a fragile state that could split apart at any time, when she stepped into the vortex to return home it had been whole. Meng Hao had looked at her as she had left and could confirm that that was the case. The problem must have occurred. After Chu Yuyan entered the vortex leading from the area of the windswept realm back to the ninth mountain, Meng Hao had also made that trip, which had taken only a brief moment. Clearly, though, that brief moment was all it took for Chu Yuyan to lose her spiritual soul. The physical soul lives because of the spiritual soul. The spiritual soul nourishes the physical soul. If I can find Chu Yuyan's spiritual soul, then maybe bringing her back to life wouldn't be impossible. Meng Hao looked back down at Chu Yuyan, his eyes flickering with a glint of obsession as he decided that he would definitely track down Chu Yuyan's spiritual soul. His right hand flashed with an incantation gesture as he unleashed karmic hexing. He gently pushed down onto Chu Yuyan's forehead, and yet no karma appeared. His eyes flickered with madness as he suddenly began to walk around Chu Yuyan's coffin. He moved faster and faster until ghost images of himself appeared. First it was one ghost image, and then 2, 3, 4. He moved so quickly that a wind sprang up and even more ghost images appeared. Soon there were 10, 15, and even more. Meng Hao didn't hesitate at all to use the strange walking technique, which would enable him to return to the day before. One day earlier, Chu Yuyan's physical soul had not completely dispersed. One interesting point. In the original Chinese, Zhen actually typed Su Qing instead of Chu Yuyan in this paragraph. It's not the first time either. I've always fixed the mistake, but this is a pretty intense scene where he yet again mixed up the names. As Meng Hao walked, gradually, the power of time travel began to surge out. As soon as the aura appeared, it blurred the vision of the surrounding cultivators. Even Pill Demon's eyes went blank. It was only the Kunlun Society patriarch whose eyes suddenly began to shine with a bright light. Inwardly, massive waves of shock battered his heart. The Tao of time travel. I can't believe that Meng Hao can actually use the Tao of time travel. He wasn't the only one who was shaken. The other Tao realm patriarchs in the Kunlun Society were all shaken. As they watched the scene with divine sense, they were thoroughly flabbergasted by Meng Hao. They all watched as gradually, more and more ghost images of Meng Hao appeared, until finally, they merged together into a ring. In the middle of that ring was the coffin and the area around it which apparently was moving through time. The grass swayed and ripples spread out. Numerous figures appeared, coming and going and coming. None of the spectators noticed how incredibly pale Meng Hao's face was. This walking technique was bizarre and enigmatic to be sure, but it was incredibly difficult for Meng Hao to use it to return Chu Yuyan to the previous day. However, no thoughts of giving up entered his mind. He moved faster and faster. Regardless of how much blood oozed out of his mouth, regardless of how his body withered, regardless of how his cultivation base trembled, he persisted. As he continued onward, more ripples flowed through the area around Chu Yuyan, moving faster and faster. More time passed, and suddenly Chu Yuyan's eyes opened. It was in that moment that Meng Hao finally stopped in place. He coughed up 9 mouthfuls of blood, and a patch of his hair turned white and then transformed into nothing but ash, and his entire body looked much older. Chu Yuyan's eyes were listless, which was how she had looked the previous day just before she died. She was not aware of the things around her, nor could she sense that Meng Hao had traveled back an entire day just to see her. He didn't hesitate for a moment. Still coughing up blood, he performed an incantation gesture and unleashed a demon-sealing hexing magic, reaching out to push his finger down onto Chu Yuyan's forehead. In that moment, his mind trembled, and suddenly, faint karma threads appeared all around Chu Yuyan. More than half of the threads were connected to Meng Hao himself, which caused the pain in his heart to intensify. However, he knew that time was of the essence. He focused all of his concentration and began to examine the other karma threads, hoping to use them to locate her spiritual soul. He held nothing back, rotating his cultivation base to the full, causing azure light to shine around him. Finally, he found one particular karma thread that led out into the void. He sent divine sense to follow it, going further and further until he was also in the void. It was there that Meng Hao caught sight of a familiar vortex that was none other than the vortex which Paragon Sea Dream had summoned after the collapse of the windswept realm, allowing everyone to return to where they had come from. It was there that the karma thread began to collapse. Seeing that the thread was about to vanish, Meng Hao roared, causing more time magic to explode out. Coupled with his cultivation base and the karmic hexing, he once again began to walk, using the Tao of time travel. He unleashed all of his power, until finally he saw two visions. In the first vision, he saw Chu Yuyan stepping into a vortex, her face pale. That was the moment in which everyone returned through Paragon Sea Dream's vortex. By means of this particular divine ability, Meng Hao was able to follow time back to its essence to see what had happened here in the past. What he saw was that, as Chu Yuyan traveled through the vortex, she passed by the 9 mountains of the mountain and sea realm. When she was passing by the 8th mountain and sea, all of a sudden, a voice could be heard within the vortex. Soul, come to me. Chapter 12:10, Using Karma to Track the Soul. /expand. Actually, that vortex had not truly been created by Paragon Sea Dream. It had long existed within the mountain and sea realm, a teleportation path that, theoretically speaking, could be opened by anyone in the Tao realm. The caveat was that the price to open it was staggering. In fact, only paragons could arbitrarily pay such a price. Even if an ordinary Tao realm cultivator were to overdraw on their cultivation base, they would not be able to open that ancient teleportation path. Therefore, most of the time the path was safe. For example, when Meng Hao and all the others used it, nothing untoward happened. However, the path was not under the protection of one of Paragon Sea Dream's magical techniques. It was merely a teleportation path. Therefore, accidents could happen. Also, certain accidents could occur which not even Paragon Sea Dream would be aware of. Originally, nothing bad should have happened to Chu Yuyan. Although her soul was in a state where it could be split, as long as she returned to the 9th mountain and sea and spent enough time recuperating, she would return to normal. Unfortunately, during the process of her teleportation, someone unleashed a soul-gathering magic. Although many cultivators could use such techniques, all of them were different, leading to different results. Some could affect an area only 3,000 meters wide. Others could actually cover an entire realm. Its purpose was to find departed souls and collect them together, where they could then be used by certain cultivators to craft magical items. In the second vision, Meng Hao saw a huge land mass and a sect. That sect was built into a black cliff, upon which were written 3 huge characters. Black Soul Society. Meng Hao saw countless souls there, converged into a massive river that flowed toward the black cliff, and an incense burner into which the souls were being absorbed. A cultivator sat cross-legged next to the incense burner. He looked middle-aged but had a pale face. His expression was arrogant, and from the fluctuations of his cultivation base, it was possible to tell that, shockingly, he was a 2 essences Tao realm expert. As Meng Hao looked on, he caught sight of one particular soul among the others, which was Chu Yuyan. The key to it all was not the Tao realm cultivator, but rather that incense burner. That was how Chu Yuyan's soul had been extracted from the teleportation tunnel. The incense burner was surrounded by thousands of other cross-legged disciples of this sect. When they waved their arms, black bottle gourds would fly out of their bags of holding, which would then belch forth innumerable souls. Unexpectedly, most of those souls belonged to mortals. Miserable screams then rang out as the souls were refined by the cultivators. Slaughtering mortals was something absolutely forbidden within the mountain and sea realm, something that most people would condemn. After all, the mortal world was the foundation of everything. If cultivators were allowed to wantonly massacre the mortals which made up their foundation, then the mountain and sea realm would eventually collapse. In fact, the laws of the mountain and sea realm expressly forbade such a thing. If something like that happened, heavenly punishment would be rained down. And yet, there was no heavenly punishment being inflicted on this Black Soul Society. The vision shattered into pieces, and everything was over. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes, transforming into a tempest as he rose to his feet. The Black Soul Society of the 8th Mountain and Sea, he thought. So the laws of the mountain and sea realm do not send heavenly punishment your way. Regardless of the reason, I will become your heavenly punishment. His eyes glowed coldly, both from what had happened to Chu Yuyan and also what the Black Soul Society was doing to the souls of mortals. Such brutality was something that Meng Hao could not accept. Even death could not wipe out the vileness of such crimes. A murderous aura exploded out from him, causing all of the cultivators around him to tremble. Even the Tao realm patriarchs of the Kunlun society looked on with serious expressions. None of them had any idea why such a murderous aura had suddenly sprung up from Meng Hao. He took a deep breath, causing the murderous aura to fade away, then gazed down at Chu Yuyan. As he looked at her, he could tell that the spiritual energy of Mount Kunlun had been gathered in the coffin, ensuring that Chu Yuyan's fleshly body would not be destroyed. The spiritual energy of the Kunlun society was different from that of elsewhere. It was abundant in life force and had existed in this place for a very long time. It inherently caused life force to flourish and would significantly reduce the decay rate of the flesh itself. The coffin itself was also a treasured item that was in harmony with the Kunlun society and would further slow the process of decay. However, if it left the Kunlun society, that could harm Chu Yuyan. Meng Hao was well aware that he could not take her corpse away. It wasn't that he was fundamentally incapable of doing so, rather, it would be best for Chu Yuyan to stay here. Eyes flashing with determination, he extended his right hand and rested it on the coffin, silently unleashing numerous magical techniques to seal it. Glittering marks appeared all over its surface, imbuing it not just with Meng Hao's aura, but more importantly, the will of the future lord of the mountain and sea realm. That would ensure that Chu Yuyan's corpse would not be defiled. At the same time, Meng Hao waved his sleeve, causing a huge amount of immortal jade to fly out and pile up around and over the coffin, forming a mountainous grave mound. The grave mound of immortal jade left Chu Yuyan completely protected. Coupled with the unique aura of the Kunlun society, it would ensure that she remained preserved for quite some time. Having done all this, Meng Hao waved his hand again, causing an equally towering mountain of immortal jade to pile up next to the first pile. Clasping hands, he turned toward the Kunlun Society's Tao Realm Patriarch and bowed deeply. Kunlun Society, I hope it will not be too much of an inconvenience to ensure that Chu Yuyan's body remains preserved. Please take this mountain of immortal jade as a token of my deep thanks. The ancient old man looked at the mountain of immortal jade. Even he was moved by the sight of so much wealth. Actually, as far as the old man was concerned, Chu Yuyan was a disciple of the Kunlun Society, and it wouldn't have consumed much of the Kunlun Society's spiritual energy to keep her body preserved in the first place. Now, with all this immortal jade added in as compensation. The old man looked back somberly at Meng Hao and nodded. Then he said, "Young friend Meng Hao, please set your mind at ease. You have my word that as long as I live in this world, this place will be a restricted area in the Kunlun Society. Nobody will be able to step half a pace into it without Pill Demon's express permission." Meng Hao once again bowed deeply to the ancient man. He knew well what was expected in return for this promise. "Many thanks," he said quietly. "I owe the Kunlun Society a great favor." Meng Hao rarely owed other people, but now, for the sake of the safety of Chu Yuyan's corpse, he was willing to do just that. "Well then, young friend Meng Hao, did you find Chu Yuyan's spiritual soul?" The old man smiled in response to Meng Hao's words. In fact, to him the most important aspect of the whole exchange was to sow the seeds of a good relationship with Meng Hao. "I did," Meng Hao replied, eyes shining coldly. "Where is it?" the old man asked. "The 8th mountain. Senior, I have some matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave. I will do everything I can to bring Chu Yuyan's soul back as quickly as possible." He looked over at the grave mound of immortal jade, then turned and left. He knew that he owed far too much to Chu Yuyan, so much so in fact that he could never pay her back. His journeys through the 9th mountain and sea were now at an end. He was not in the mood to think about where his next destination was, nor did he need to. Filled with the desire to slaughter the Black Soul Society of the 8th mountain, he turned, transforming into a beam of light that shot out of the Kunlun Society. His heart was torn to pieces, and his mood was foul as he headed directly toward the 9th mountain. The 9th mountain was the home of the Jai clan, but was also the home of the immortal ancient Taoist rite. His plan to leave the 9th mountain and sea had originally involved flying alone through the starry sky, but now time was too short. Su Qing was currently healthy and safe in the 4th mountain and could wait for him. Unfortunately, Chu Yuyan's soul could be refined at any moment at the hands of a cultivator of the Black Soul Society. When he thought about that, Meng Hao's heart ached even more, and the killing intent in his eyes grew more explosive. As he shot off into the distance, he murmured, "Mountains have no worries, till hit with snowy flurries. Waters feel no woe, till the winds do gust and blow." The peak of the ninth mountain was occupied by the Jai clan. Further down from them was the immortal ancient Taoist rite. Apparently, the Tao realm patriarchs of the immortal ancient Taoist rite had long since predicted the fact that he was coming, even down to his exact time of arrival. By the time he arrived, all of the cultivators of the immortal ancient Taoist rite were seated cross-legged in a public square, chanting scriptures. A huge cauldron was located in the middle of all of them, fully 300 meters tall, filled with swirling streams of smoke that formed the character, Immortal. The character was faintly visible, radiating a feeling of ancientness that made it seem as if it had been transported from ancient times into the modern era. Closest to the cauldron were 5 old men, all of whom were in the Tao realm. The centermost of that group had white hair, and was the very patriarch who had paid such close attention to Meng Hao during the trial by fire so many years ago. 1. The patriarch mentioned here popped up several times during the trial by fire in the ruins of immortality. 2 key parts were in chapters 852 and 854. He was also the one who had calculated that Meng Hao would eventually join the immortal ancient Taoist rite. He had already prepared the immortal ancient Taoist rite grand spell formation to help Meng Hao open the path to the 8th mountain. "I know why you've come," he said. "The immortal ancient will build a bridge connecting from here to the 8th mountain, walk across that bridge, to pierce through the void, traverse the starry sky, and on the other side will be the 8th mountain. I hope that your trip there goes smoothly." When he finished speaking, he waved his right index finger toward the huge cauldron. Instantly, the other Tao realm experts performed incantation gestures and pointed at the cauldron as well. The chanting of scriptures from the immortal ancient Taoist rite disciples grew louder, echoing about in all directions, transforming into a strange power that shook the entire 9th mountain. It was almost as if there were some massive power within the 9th mountain itself that was complying with the cauldron to explode out, to become a bridge. It was a bridge that pierced through the void, a majestic vortex which connected the 8th mountain and the 9th mountain through the barrier that separated them. It was a majestic bridge, shining with boundless, scintillating light. Meng Hao took a deep breath, then bowed deeply to everyone in the immortal ancient Taoist rite. He was very appreciative of what they were doing, and even felt deep affection that caused him to hold the bow for several breaths of time. Then he looked up and stepped forward onto the bridge. He followed the bridge up into the vortex in the starry sky, which he entered, taking him far, far away. This was immortal ancient building a bridge to leave the 9th mountain. Chapter 12:11. Immortal ancient builds a bridge leaving the 9th mountain. End of Book 7. Immortal ancient builds a bridge leaving the 9th mountain. Book 8. My Mountain and Sea Realm. Chapter 12:12. 8th Mountain and Sea. In terms of overall size, it was similar to the 9th mountain and sea. It also had a sea, the major difference being that it wasn't called the 9th sea, but rather the 8th sea. There were also 4 planets which orbited the 8th mountain, although their names were different than the planets in the 9th mountain. And yet, when it came to the overall system of cultivation and the way the place was set up, it was very similar. After all, the 8th mountain and sea and the 9th mountain and sea were both parts of the mountain and sea realm. However, there was a barrier between each of the various mountains and seas, a barrier which was extremely difficult to pierce a hole through. That made it so that the cultivators from the different mountains and seas couldn't easily pass through, unless there was a war, and the power of countless cultivators could be converged to break through the barrier and enter the neighboring mountains and seas. Another method would be to rely on an incredibly powerful cultivation base to rip open a tier that could be stepped through. However, to do such a thing required paying a heavy price, so unless some momentous situation had developed, few people would ever use that method. Besides, only Tao realm cultivators could do so. As for Patriarch Reliance, he had his own special methods. Even still, he had to pay a certain price to be able to break through from the 9th mountain and sea and into the 8th mountain and sea. When the immortal ancient Taoist rite built their bridge, they converged power from the immortal ancient Taoist rite that had accumulated for many years. It created a passageway that could ignore the barrier and could allow someone to pass between the 2 mountains without any hindrance. However, it would only last for a brief period of time. In the western region of the 8th mountain and sea was a stretch of the pitch-black void in which a white fissure had suddenly opened up. Brilliant, blinding light shone out in all directions, making the fissure completely conspicuous in the pitch-black darkness. Gradually, boundless immortal chi began to emanate out from the fissure. the type that would cause anyone who saw it to assume that there was some sort of precious treasure located inside. The fissure was not motionless, but rather was shrinking. Apparently, it would vanish in a relatively short period of time. In the area around that fissure, fierce fighting was currently underway. Booms rang out, along with blood-curdling screams. The glow of magical techniques could be seen, sending multicolored light flashing in all directions. Shockingly, two groups of cultivators, over 1,000 in total, were currently engaged in a bloody battle. One of the groups wore yellow robes with gold dragons embroidered on the sleeves, whereas the other group wore white Taoist robes. Both groups attacked viciously, as if they each couldn't stand to even live under the same sky as the other. Occasionally, someone would even self-detonate, ensuring that the battle was a bitter one, filled with the reek of blood and gore, and of mangled corpses. All of the cultivators had bloodshot eyes. The weakest among them were Stage 3 immortals, and each one fought without holding anything back. Above the main battlefield, a smaller fight was going on between 4 people. 3 were men and 1 was a woman, and all of them were in the mid-ancient realm. The ripples caused by the magical techniques they unleashed far exceeded that of the group below. Above them was yet another fight, between only 2 people. Both were old men in the late ancient realm, just half a step away from the great circle. They sat cross-legged across from each other, a game board placed between them, upon which they were playing Go. However, the game they were playing was one that brimmed with a feeling of battle. Every time they placed a piece down onto the board, it would cause rumbling sounds to fill the void. "Eccentric water cloud," said the old man in the yellow robe. "The entrance to this arcane pocket realm was discovered by my Woodflame Society. It has nothing to do with your water cloud sect." Eyes flickering coldly, he picked up a black game piece and put it down onto the board. As soon as the piece touched down, rumbling filled the air, and an indescribably explosive force shook the starry sky. "You spoke incorrectly, Taoist Woodflame. The arcane pocket realms of the 8th Mountain and Sea have always gone by right to whoever discovered them. As for this particular arcane pocket realm, the patriarch of our Watercloud sect discovered it 300 years ago. However, at that time, he didn't have an appropriate physical body. He was forced to make a notation of its location and wait for the next time it opened. Now that it has opened, the Watercloud sect has come to claim it. You are the ones who are forcefully interfering." The old man in the white Taoist robe snorted coldly, picked up a white game piece and put it down. Immediately, rumbling sounds could be heard. "Look, you old geezer," the yellow-robed man roared angrily. "If you want to go that far, then let me tell you this. The arcane pocket realm was discovered 700 years ago by the Woodflame Society." "Listen, you old coot," the white-robed man said with a cold harumph. "I just accidentally left out the word 1,000. Actually, our Watercloud sect patriarch discovered this place 1,300 years ago." Like hell, the Watercloud sect didn't even exist 1,300 years ago. As the two men argued, their eyes glowed coldly. They continued to place game pieces, causing booms to ring out, shaking the entire starry sky. Below them, the fierce fighting grew even more intense. However, it was at this point that the light shining out from the fissure grew more intense than before, covering the entire battlefield. The fighting cultivators subconsciously gasped as their cultivation bases leaped abnormally. Some of them even made significant progress, and signs of a breakthrough appeared in some of them. Interestingly, of those who now hovered on the verge of cultivation-based breakthroughs, all of them cultivated flame magic. Everyone was shocked by this, and their eyes began to shine with bright light. Even the 4 mid-ancient realm cultivators and the 2 old men playing Go all gasped, and their faces flickered with shock. "That's a Tao-level arcane pocket realm." "It's definitely Tao-level, otherwise, the immortal chi emanating out wouldn't have essence in it. It can lead to cultivation-based breakthroughs. That flame essence indicates that whichever cultivator was put to rest in the arcane pocket realm in the past was a Tao realm expert with flame essence." The 2 old men began to murmur and eye each other murderously. A Tao-level arcane pocket realm is a rarity in the 8th Mountain and Sea. Although they had only been engaged in a battle of words before, and had held back from actually attacking, now that they realized how precious this arcane pocket realm was, their cultivation base power exploded out. The game board between them shattered, sending the black and white game pieces flying out in all directions as attacks were unleashed. The fighting intensified and booms rang out, shaking the starry sky. Both sides were relatively evenly matched, making it difficult for either one to secure victory quickly. Furthermore, the white light emanating out from the fissure suddenly began to retract, as if it were about to vanish. Not good. The Tao-level arcane pocket realm is about to close. Damn it. Why is it happening so fast? Could it be that all Tao-level arcane pocket realms are like this? It must not be allowed to close. The Tao soul hasn't been extracted yet. The faces of the two old men fell as they fought. Suddenly, they looked into each other's eyes. Let's stop fighting for the moment and send forth the bodies we've prepared. Let the Tao soul in the arcane pocket realm make its own decision about who it belongs to. Agreed. The two old men gritted their teeth. Having no other option, and seeing that the fissure was about to fade away, the best option they had was to fight for a 50-50 chance. They flicked their sleeves, causing their cultivation bases to erupt, using their power to separate the two groups of fighting cultivators. Then, they transformed into beams of light that shot howling toward the fissure. As they neared it, both old men cried out, Tonger Shambin, Shanchan Mui. In response to their words, 4 people flew out from the crowds, 2 men and 2 women. The men were handsome and the women were beautiful. They nervously faced the old men, clasped hands and bowed. Greetings, Patriarch. Attempt to absorb the Tao soul into your bodies and assimilate it. Use it to awaken the power within you. Whether or not you succeed will depend on your luck. The 4 cultivators gritted their teeth, then flew toward the fissure. As they closed in, they bit down on their tongues, spitting out mouthfuls of blood that flew toward the opening. Everyone in the area gazed fixedly at the scene which was playing out. When the 4 cultivators spit out their blood, a massive force exploded out from within the shrinking fissure. The opening suddenly expanded, causing brilliant light to explode out. It was so blinding that nobody could see what was inside the fissure other than light. It's coming out, the 2 old men cried excitedly. Rumble. As the fissure expanded, the massive force exploded out, and suddenly, a hand appeared from within the light, slowly stretching out from deep inside. It grabbed onto the edge of the fissure, after which, a person began to emerge. As soon as the figure appeared, immortal power erupted out, joined by essence, striking fear into the hearts of the other cultivators, who began to edge backward. The 2 old men fought back against the power, but it was almost too much for them. Their expressions were those of complete delight. This feeling, this aura, it's the Tao soul. It's coming out, it's coming out. The 2 men and 2 women outside of the fissure were backing up, faces pale. They could sense that whatever was coming out of the fissure was some sort of supreme existence, something that filled them with terror. Rumble. The figure emerged fully from the fissure, a young man wearing a long white robe. He had long black hair and looked like a handsome scholar. Almost as soon as he emerged, the fissure closed up behind him and vanished. At the same time, the blinding light that had filled the area faded away. The 2 old men stared with wide eyes at this young man, and they weren't the only ones. The 2 men and 2 women stared in shock. This was definitely not what they had imagined a Tao soul would look like. Could it be that Tao realm souls really look like this? That was what both old men were thinking in their confusion. The 2 of them had never seen a Tao-level arcane pocket realm before, and therefore, weren't really certain as to whether or not the young man standing in front of them was what a Tao soul was supposed to look like. Is this the 8th mountain and sea? The young man asked. Of course, he was none other than Meng Hao. The fact that so many people were there to receive him was quite a shock, especially when he saw that the group up front was comprised of 2 handsome men and 2 beautiful women. One of those beautiful women immediately dropped to her knees before Meng Hao and threw both hands up into the air. Senior, please accept me as an offering. The other 3 quickly followed suit, kneeling down and raising their hands. Senior, please accept me as an offering. Meng Hao had a strange expression on his face as he looked around. When he looked over at the 2 old men with the highest cultivation bases, they began to tremble and back away. As senior, the offerings are all prepared, said the old man in the yellow robe. Those 4 in front of you. S, sir, whichever one you like you can have. W, we're too old and not really suitable. Chapter 12:13, Heaven God Alliance. A strange expression could be seen on Meng Hao's face as he looked at the 2 old men, and then back down at the men and women kneeling in front of him. Having no time for delays, he once again asked, Is this or is this not the 8th mountain and sea? The first of the women to have dropped to her knees quickly nodded and replied, Senior, this most definitely is the 8th mountain and sea. Hearing this, Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and he waved his hand, causing a magical item suitable for the immortal realm to fly over to the woman. Take this treasure. Can you tell me how to get to the Black Soul Society? He asked. The woman looked at the magical item, eyes flickering with pleasure. She quickly took it and was about to reply when suddenly, the two old men finally realized what was going on. Expressions flickering, they advanced. He's not the Tao soul. Damn it, he's obviously got a fleshly body. He's not the Tao soul, he just got here before us and already merged with it. The two old men simply couldn't think of any other reasonable explanation other than Meng Hao arriving before them and stealing the good fortune which they felt belonged to them. The two men exchanged a glance, and then their killing intent surged. If he just merged with the Tao soul, then he's not stable and can't awaken it. Kill him. They immediately shot toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao frowned and glanced at the two old men. His gaze was like an azure bolt of lightning, like a sharp sword that stabbed deep into their brains. Their faces fell, minds reeling, they coughed up blood and staggered backward. Attack together. Kill him and get that Tao soul back. Behind the two old men were the four mid-ancient realm cultivators, who howled and attacked. All of the other nearly 1,000 cultivators in the area unleashed various divine abilities and magical techniques. Meng Hao snorted coldly. His action from moments before had been a simple warning to these people to not provoke him. He didn't want to cause any trouble here, he just wanted to know how to get to the Black Soul Society, and yet they simply couldn't get the message. Therefore, he decided to stop holding back. He lifted his right foot up and took a step forward. That single step caused power to erupt off of him. A huge shockwave spread out explosively in all directions, transforming into an attack that swept over all of the nearby cultivators. Miserable shrieks rang out, and countless mouthfuls of blood sprayed about. The cultivators all felt as if an invisible wall had slammed into them, a backlash that left them seriously injured and spinning off in multiple directions. As the blood sprayed out of their mouths, they trembled, looking at Meng Hao with astonishment and terror. They didn't dare to approach even half a step closer to him. The four mid-ancient realm cultivators were even more seriously injured. Blood sprayed out of their mouths, and their cultivation bases were seriously damaged. Even their souls became unstable, causing their faces to grow ashen. However, it was in this moment that something seemed to awaken inside of them, which Meng Hao immediately noticed. As the four of them backed up, what appeared to be the shadows of souls appeared behind them, although they were faint. This. The two old men were equally shaken with fear. However, they didn't give up on their idea. They continued to advance toward Meng Hao, roaring and performing incantation gestures. Their late ancient realm cultivation bases exploded with power, and something seemed to awaken within them too. As that happened, illusory images appeared behind him. They weren't Dharma idols, but rather soul shadows. They weren't the souls of the old men, but rather the souls of two unknown cultivators who were both at the great circle of the ancient realm. By merging with them, the two old men were actually able to increase the power of their cultivation bases. They rapidly rose from the late ancient realm to the great circle of the ancient realm, causing their attacks to burst with increasing power, sending ripples out in all directions. Well, isn't this interesting? Meng Hao said, eyes gleaming. This was his first time in the 8th Mountain and Sea, and although the cultivators here practiced the same system of cultivation as in the 9th Mountain and Sea, there were obviously some details which were different. For example, this awakening must have something to do with the Tao soul they had just mentioned. After a moment of thought, Meng Hao lifted his right arm and waved his sleeve. Although the motion seemed ordinary, the faces of the two old men instantly fell. The man in the white robe began to shake, and then vomited up a huge mouthful of blood. His body rapidly aged, and the soul behind him let out a miserable shriek as more than half of it withered away. The old man went all out to dodge away, only stopping after he had fallen back by 300 meters. It was there that he looked at Meng Hao with an expression of unprecedented amazement. Tao realm, he's in the Tao realm. He didn't absorb a Tao soul, he's actually in the Tao realm himself. At the same time as his voice rang out, the yellow-robed man's face flickered. He did not cough up any blood, and yet at this point he would rather have been the one coughing up. That was because he was being wrenched through the void, soul shadow and all, directly toward Meng Hao. In the blink of an eye, the man was suspended in front of Meng Hao, a look of terror in his eyes. He was completely immobilized, and being so close to Meng Hao, he could clearly sense the vast, boundless power within him. He knew that Meng Hao was powerful enough to eradicate him with a simple thought. "As senior," the old man said, trembling. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he measured up the yellow-robed old man. His eyes flashed like lightning, as if he could easily see through him. A few breaths of time passed, and then Meng Hao's eyes came to fall on the soul shadow, which was also trembling as it sensed a force like that of heavenly might emanating off of Meng Hao. Fuse the soul into the body and use it to form blood vessels, thus entering a symbiosis. Interesting. Not a bad technique. It ensures that the powerful party can avoid death and the weak party becomes more powerful. Now that I think about it, the green lightning hand Kingley used back in the windswept realm was probably a secret magic derived from this method. Nodding, Meng Hao looked away from the soul shadow. 1. Han Kingley, the echelon cultivator from the 8th Mountain and Sea, was the guy who fought Meng Hao starting around chapter 1095, using lightning and bone magic. Like most of the other echelon cultivators, he ended up getting saved by Meng Hao and then helping him. "How do I get to the Black Soul Society?" he asked slowly. The yellow-robed old man immediately gushed. "The the Black Soul Society is in the north, which is quite far from here. That region is controlled by the Heaven God Society, which means that unless you're from the Heaven God Alliance, you can't go there. Even if you obtain a writ of passage, you're only allowed as far as the outer borders of the Heaven God Alliance. Senior, if you want to obtain such a writ, that's fine. You can come to the Woodflame Society. Our sect has a teleportation portal that goes in the direction of the Heaven God Alliance." Heaven God Alliance? After a moment of thought, Meng Hao released the yellow-robed man and asked him to lead the way. The old man was instantly excited and respectfully agreed. Looking haughtily out of the corner of his eye at the white-robed man from the Watercloud sect, he gave a cold harumph and then led Meng Hao off into the distance along with this Woodflame Society cultivators. The white-robed man remained behind, heart-pounding. He was aware that Taoist Woodflame wanted to pander to a Tao realm expert. In fact, he himself also wanted the same thing. However, when he thought about how terrifying Meng Hao was, he hesitated. In the end, he simply watched as the Woodflame Society cultivators escorted Meng Hao off into the distance. After a long moment, a grim look appeared on his face. "I simply can't believe that Taoist Woodflame didn't notice that this Tao realm expert is not from the 8th Mountain and Sea. He's obviously from one of the other mountains and seas, and is obviously strong enough to break through into ours. People like that always have some major plot afoot, and we can't afford to get involved with something like that." Murmuring to himself, the white-robed old man led his people off into the distance, and also gave orders that they were to speak nothing about what had happened. He even ordered that the entire sect was not to divulge even the slightest scrap of information about Meng Hao. Of course, Taoist Woodflame of the Woodflame Society absolutely could tell that Meng Hao had an extraordinary background. However, he was willing to make a gamble. In the 8th Mountain and Sea, the Woodflame Society was a small sect that existed in the shadows of the Heaven God Alliance and the Great Clans. If he could acquire the favor of a Tao realm expert, it would be of incalculable value to them. As long as he could benefit it some way, then it didn't matter where that Tao realm expert came from. Meng Hao was no fool either, and could tell what Taoist Woodflame was thinking. Therefore, as they proceeded along, he asked some questions about the overall state of the 8th Mountain and Sea. "Senior, there is only one alliance in the 8th Mountain and Sea, and that is the Heaven God Alliance. It is made up of many sects and clans, and the Black Soul Society is only one of them. The alliance as a whole is led by the Heaven God Society. The patriarch of the Heaven God Society is none other than the 8th Mountain and Sea Lord. He is referred to as Heaven God. In addition to the Heaven God Alliance, the 8th Mountain and Sea also has the 3 great Taoist societies. However, they rarely dabble in the affairs of the outside world. In fact, they've hardly been seen at all in recent years. In addition to that are the 2 great clans, which are the Meng clan and the Han clan. The Meng clan is on the decline, but based on their former glory, they are still considered a major player. As for the Han clan, they are like the sun at high noon. However, neither the 3 great Taoist societies nor the 2 great clans can compare at all to the Heaven God Alliance. Of the 4 planets in the 8th Mountain, the Han and Meng clans jointly occupy one of them. The other 3 are controlled by the Heaven God Alliance. Taoist Woodflame explained everything that he knew, and in the end, gave Meng Hao a jade slip that contained a detailed map of the 8th Mountain and Sea. "I'm not sure about the other mountains and seas, but in the 8th Mountain and Sea, we have something called arcane pocket realms. There are quite a few of them, and if you can find one that has never been opened before, then you can bury a corpse inside. Once the soul has escaped the body, you can provide it with a suitable body to meld with, and they become undying. This kind of symbiosis can be considered a kind of awakening for those who practice cultivation." Meng Hao listened to everything that Taoist Woodflame told him, but when he mentioned the Meng clan, Meng Hao's eyes glazed over as he became distracted by his own thoughts. After a moment, though, they gleamed as he sent some divine sense into the jade slip he now held in his hand. Instantly, a map of the eighth mountain and sea appeared in his mind. "There are no ruins of immortality," he asked suddenly. "Ruins of immortality?" Taoist Woodflame asked, looking confused. "What are they?" Meng Hao's eyes flickered thoughtfully as he considered certain matters, then continued to ask questions, especially about the arcane pocket realms. A day later, Meng Hao reached the Woodflame Society, having a much better understanding of the eighth mountain and sea. That was especially true of the arcane pocket realms, which made Meng Hao think of the ruins of immortality. Actually, the arcane pocket realms of the eighth mountain and sea are really the ruins of immortality. However, they are fragmented and scattered about randomly here, which is why numerous so-called arcane pocket realms appear, and that is why they were used to become graves for cultivators. You could even say that the eighth mountain and sea is actually one huge graveyard. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed with understanding. Chapter 12:14. My name is Meng Hao. Meng Hao hadn't originally planned to go the eighth mountain and sea. His prime destination had been the fourth mountain and sea. He had hoped to go there directly, or alternatively, to simply pass through the eighth mountain and sea on his way. If the latter was the only option, he would proceed to the seventh mountain, the sixth mountain, the fifth mountain, and eventually would reach the fourth mountain. He would pass through multiple mountains and seas to find Su Qing and bring her home. But then the situation with Chu Yuyan developed, and he had been forced to change his mind. He could not proceed directly toward the fourth mountain. He owed Chu Yuyan far too much, and had no option other than to track down her soul and rescue her. Therefore he traveled not through, but to the eighth mountain and sea. Here he had ties to both Patriarch Reliance and the Ming clan. The Ming clan was his mother's clan, his relatives. And as for Patriarch Reliance, when Meng Hao found out that he was in the eighth mountain and sea, he had long since decided that no one would be able to prevent him from acquiring him as a mount. Once that happened, he would be able to use Patriarch Reliance's power to effortlessly pass through the barriers between the various mountains and seas. Now he stood in the Woodflame Society's teleportation portal. They didn't qualify to occupy their own planet, but had instead built their sect on a huge asteroid. Because the eighth mountain's political structure was a bit different than that of the ninth mountain, virtually all of the small sects were set up in a similar way. Senior, from here, you can teleport onto one of the artificial planets arrayed in the vicinity of the Heaven God Alliance. Those planets form the gateway to the Heaven God Alliance. Taoist Woodflame clasped hands, bowing deeply as he began to explain. From there, you should be able to find the teleportation portal leading to the Black Soul Society. Meng Hao glanced thoughtfully at the man, who during this entire time hadn't mentioned a word about any sort of payment for the information he was giving. Suddenly, Meng Hao reached out and tapped Taoist Woodflame's forehead, causing a bit of the essence of divine flame to flow into his body. Taoist Woodflame shivered slightly, and his face suddenly turned bright red, as if he were about to belch out flame. His eyes went wild with joy. Trembling, he immediately dropped to his knees. Senior, many thanks for your great kindness. I will never forget this for the rest of my life. Senior, if you have any demands, I will go through hell or high water to meet them. Taoist Woodflame was as incredibly excited as he should be, considering that he cultivated flame attribute techniques. Now that Meng Hao had given him some of the essence of divine flame, you could say that his path toward the Tao realm had been opened. A gift like that was like the gift of a new life. The path of cultivation is murky, Meng Hao said slowly, and all I can give you is a lamp to light your way. How far you go will be up to you. It all depends on yourself. Do your best. He swished his sleeve, causing the spirit stone formation he had set up around the teleportation portal to sparkle. As the spirit stones crumbled, the power of the spell formation caused a brilliant flash of light. When the light faded away, Meng Hao was nowhere to be seen. However, Taoist Woodflame was still there on his knees, kowtowing. In the eighth mountain and sea, the Heaven God Alliance had staked their claim to 3 of the planets which orbited the mountain. That area was known as the Inner Ring. Outside of the Inner Ring, the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance used various Taoist magics to merge countless asteroids together into numerous artificial planets. That was referred to as the Outer Ring. The artificial planets in the Outer Ring were not like the 4 great planets, which possessed planet souls and could give birth to true immortals. At most, they provided a place for cultivators to live and practice cultivation. However, they still looked very impressive and shocking. roughly 70% of the starry sky in the eighth mountain, and sea fell under the jurisdiction of the Heaven God Alliance. This space formed a single discrete territory and was protected by an invisible shield which non-Heaven God Alliance cultivators couldn't pass through without having the requisite identity medallion and paying the entry tax. The entry point was formed by a linear array of 7 planets, which were the gateway to the Heaven God Alliance. Meng Hao appeared on the third of those 7 gateway planets, into an extraordinarily lively and bustling city. There were cultivators everywhere, coming from and going to the Heaven God Alliance. No one paid any attention at all to Meng Hao. However, a beam of light did spread out from the teleportation portal itself and sweep over him. The identity medallion he had requested from Taoist Woodflame immediately proved itself to be useful, glittering as it concealed his true identity. Suddenly, Meng Hao heard an annoyed voice from off to the side. "Now that you've arrived, hurry up and move along. There are other people waiting." He looked over to see a cultivator wearing a blue and white Taoist robe, a robe which bore a special insignia that only cultivators from the Heaven God Alliance were authorized to wear. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever as he stepped out of the teleportation portal and then began to make his way through the city. At a glance, he could estimate that there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators making their way to and fro on this gateway planet of the Heaven God Alliance. 7 planets, millions of cultivators, Meng Hao murmured. With business like this, the Heaven God Alliance can make endless profit. The deepest impression that this 8th mountain had left on Meng Hao so far was of the vast enormity and power of the Heaven God Alliance. If Lord Jai hadn't rebelled and the ancient demon immortal sect were still around today, then the 9th mountain and sea would be just like this. Meng Hao sighed. Although he had prepared himself mentally before coming to the 8th mountain and sea, he had never imagined that things would be this complicated. It wasn't that his task itself was complicated. Rather, it was the situation and circumstances at hand. As for the Black Soul Society, it didn't really matter how powerful it was by itself. Even though he had seen that 2 essences Tao Realm cultivator, it wasn't enough to make him care. However, he did have to care about the Heaven God Alliance as a whole. If he really did just barge into the Heaven God Alliance's territory and wiped out the Black Soul Society, it would cause a huge stir in the entire 8th mountain and sea, and countless enemies would surely attempt to track him down and kill him. What a pity! If I had more time, I could handle things more smoothly. I could even start up a business and use its profits to set myself up a teleportation portal to make things easier. Unfortunately, there's not enough time. However, there are some things in life that you have to do, no matter the danger involved. Some people need to be saved no matter what. It might be dangerous, but even still, how could a piddling 8th mountain and sea compare to how dangerous the windswept realm was? His eyes flashed with coldness. I'm the future lord of the mountain and sea realm, and this is my realm. He took a deep breath and didn't hesitate for a moment longer. Striding forward, he went about making the inquiries necessary to determine the location of the Black Soul Society's teleportation portal. The amount of spirit stones he had to pay left his face grim, but he soon found what he was looking for, and moments later, was there at the Black Soul Society teleportation portal. The Black Soul Society wasn't qualified to be in the inner ring, and was instead located on an artificial planet. However, Patriarch Black Soul's fame was so far-reaching that even within the Heaven God Alliance he was highly esteemed. Therefore, even though the Black Soul Society wasn't in the inner ring itself, they were still very close to it. Furthermore, it completely occupied its own planet, of which it was the lord. The population of their sect was not enormous, only about 300,000 cultivators. However, all of them were very loyal to the sect and practiced magic that was related to souls. They exorcised ghosts and consumed souls. Their techniques were very unique, and in general, they were a very savage and cruel bunch. Currently, several Black Soul Society disciples were sitting cross-legged near the planetary teleportation portal. Suddenly, the portal flickered, and the disciples looked over coldly as a white-robed figure became visible. It was none other than Meng Hao. As the disciples looked at him with glinting eyes, one of them coldly barked, "Who goes there? State your business." Meng Hao acted as if he hadn't even heard. He stood there on the teleportation portal, looking around. Soon, he caught sight of a pitch-black cliff off in the distance, upon which were written 3 characters. Black Soul Society. It was exactly the same image he had seen in the vision via karmic hexing. Furthermore, he could see a huge incense burner by that cliff. Although there was currently no smoke emanating out from it or being sucked in, Meng Hao would never forget what it looked like. "This is the place," he said, his voice soft but icy. "You have no tongue, or maybe someone cut it out. Since you won't speak, I'll just drag your soul out of you." Because of the brutal nature of the techniques they cultivated, most members of other sects would treat disciples like them very politely. Seeing that Meng Hao was ignoring them, they let out cold harumphs and immediately moved to attack him. Instantly, enraged shrieks could be heard, as several evil spirits flew out toward Meng Hao as if to devour him. Retracting his gaze from the black cliff, he said, "My name is Meng Hao." Then he waved his hand, causing a wild wind to spring out and surge toward the Black Soul Society cultivators. The words Meng Hao uttered next were spoken so low that only he could hear them. "I'm here for my best friend's soul and to exterminate this sect." 1. The word I'm translating as best friend here is a Chinese term used specifically to describe your closest friend of the opposite gender, a friend who you love but not in a romantic way. When I confirmed the definition in Chinese, it ends with this: "It is a very dangerous friendship, because you don't exercise control, you can easily cross the line from friendship into something else." When I asked Madame Deathblade about the term, she threw up in her mouth and said she hates it when people use the term because it's fake, and that if I ever used that to describe another girl, she would do horrible things to me. In that moment, the shrieking souls slammed into the wild wind, and then screamed miserably as they were ripped to shreds, completely destroyed. The cultivators behind them didn't even have a chance to be surprised. The wind swept over them and they shuddered for a moment before their flesh and blood was ripped away from their bones, which then turned into ash. Unlike the souls they had summoned, they didn't even have a chance to scream. All but one of them were instantly killed in spirit and body. There was one who survived, though. A massive force wrapped around him, and he was dragged toward Meng Hao who, face calm, grabbed onto the top of his head and unleashed the magic of soul-searching. The cultivator trembled and began to froth at the mouth. The froth quickly turned red, and within the space of a few breaths of time, he was completely dead. Meng Hao released his grip, and the man transformed into ash. "A total of 5 teleportation portals, huh?" Meng Hao lifted his right foot into the air and then slammed it down. Instantly, the teleportation portal beneath him shattered into bits, as did the other 4 teleportation portals located in other locations on the planet. "Seal the doors, then start killing," Meng Hao said softly. As he looked up, he saw countless enraged figures flying in his direction. At the same time, innumerable streams of divine sense flew toward him. Meng Hao's face was calm as he began to walk forward. "Note from Urgen, the sect extermination has begun. Please give me your monthly vote tickets." Note from Deathblade, Urgen frequently solicits support, so I guess I might as well join him this time. "The sect extermination has begun. Please support me on Patreon." Chapter 12:15, Single-handedly rocking Black Soul. "What go? How dare you invade the Black Soul Society of the Heaven God Alliance? Who are you?" Meng Hao heard numerous enraged roars filling his mind that were carried by the incoming streams of divine sense. Were he an ordinary cultivator, such a convergence of divine sense would be enough to completely eradicate his mind. Instead, he continued to stride forward. "Voice cool," he said. "Like I said, my name is Meng Hao, and I'm here to exterminate this sect." When he spoke the final 3 words, his voice became like heavenly might, crashing as loud as thunder, causing the combined power of the divine sense around him to instantly shatter like dried twigs. "Are you MMMBLLLE?" Countless miserable shrieks could be heard in the distant Black Soul Society. "Kill him! A foreigner is invading, kill him! I'm going to extract his soul and refine it into a flag. Then I'll fly that flag in the cold wind of an arcane pocket realm, and let him scream for tens of thousands of years." The sky grew dim, wind screamed, and the land quaked as countless cultivators flew into the air toward Meng Hao. All of them unleashed divine abilities, and in the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with innumerable evil souls, who shot screaming toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's expression was as calm as ever as he continued to walk forward. He waved his sleeve, and the sky rumbled as a huge fissure opened up directly in the path of the incoming cultivators. Red mist roiled out of the fissure, along with sinister laughter. A huge blood-colored head appeared, and the fissure ripped open wider as something stepped out. It was the blood demon. The blood demon roared as it charged forward, transforming into a sea of blood that surged out in all directions. When it reached the cultivators, numerous blood-curdling screams rang out. Countless evil souls were destroyed, and many of the cultivators began to shake violently. Blood then started spurting out of their eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, and they were rapidly sucked dry. Within the bloody mist, a blood spirit appeared. Lacking any emotion, it became a blood shadow which passed about, causing cultivators to scream as they withered away rapidly and then died. The cultivators of the Black Soul Society were known for their cruel techniques, and all of them were the type of people who had slaughtered so many others it was impossible to keep track of how many. They believed themselves to be the most brutal entities in existence, but what they were seeing right now left the Black Soul Society cultivators astonished. When it came to brutality and viciousness, they couldn't even compare at all to the blood demon and the blood spirit. Meng Hao proceeded onward calmly, waving his hand again to cause numerous immortal mountains to descend. The rumbling sounds were so intense that it sounded like an apocalypse had arrived to this world. How impudent! A cold snort rang out, filled with matchless, awe-inspiring power. The thunderous sound caused the blood demon to tremble, the blood spirit to gape in dread, and the immortal mountains to crumble to pieces. As the sound echoed about, pitch-black smoke began to pour out from the vicinity of the black cliff. The smoke converged together into the form of a face, that of a middle-aged man, whose eyes sparkled like lightning as he looked at Meng Hao. The Black Soul Society only had one Dao Realm patriarch. However, he was no ordinary Dao Realm cultivator. When Meng Hao had seen him by means of karma threads, he had been able to determine that he was a two essences Dao Realm expert. However, from the power radiating out now, Meng Hao could tell that this was no two essences expert. This was a three essences Dao Lord. He was the one who had called Meng Hao impudent, words which shook everything above and below. In fact, those words apparently could control the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which formed a powerful force of expulsion against Meng Hao. Meng Hao's pupils constricted, and his heart sank a bit. It was at this point that 10 old men flew out to surround the smoke face. When they unleashed their cultivation bases, the shocking power of the great circle of the ancient realm exploded out. Some of them headed directly toward the blood demon and the blood spirit, whereas others shot toward Meng Hao, expressions vicious. In addition to this were over 100 other cultivators in the ancient realm, surrounded by soul lamps. It was an impressive sight, and as their power spread out, it formed a large spell formation with towering energy that seemed capable of superseding the heavens. More and more cultivators of the Black Soul Society were flying up to participate in this Dao realm-level battle. This was how powerful a sect could be. 3 essences, Meng Hao said coolly. Well, so what? Since I've come all this way, I'm going to end things here and now. He was sure of what he had seen earlier via the karma threads. Perhaps there was some factor he had been unaware of, or maybe the man had experienced a breakthrough in these past few days. Regardless of the reason why, Meng Hao was here, and even if he had to fight a 3 essences expert, he would. He took a 4th step, and his energy rocketed up, causing everything to shake dramatically. Some parts of the land even crumbled. At the same time, a roar could be heard from inside Meng Hao's bag of holding. The blood mastiff flew out, causing everything around it to shake as its great circle ancient realm cultivation base exploded with shocking power. There was even a host of shrieking black imps that turned into black beams of light and shot into the crowd. Shockingly, Meng Hao was single-handedly rocking the entire Black Soul Society. He didn't give voice to his goal of retrieving Chu Yuyan's soul. That was something he could not reveal, lest he advertise his weak spot. Of course, if they agreed to hand over the soul, he wouldn't be opposed to working out a deal with them, even if it cost him a lot financially. But if they disagreed and became aware of why he'd come, it would be incredibly dangerous for Chu Yuyan. Therefore, the simplest method was to exterminate the entire sect and take Chu Yuyan's soul by force. Meng Hao radiated a murderous aura that took form in the shape of black shockwave, which shot outward in all directions. Whatever cultivators were hit by it were instantly thrown into mental confusion and insanity. At the same time, Meng Hao's all-heaven Dao immortal cultivation base erupted with power, bolstered by his 7 god steps. His energy soared higher and higher as he took the 5th of those steps. As he did, dozens of ancient realm cultivators closed in, joined by 6 experts in the great circle of the ancient realm. They unleashed massive, destructive power that merged together into an enormous Yama soul that looked like it had just emerged from the underworld. It was clad in black armor, and while it looked human above the waist, from the waist down it had the body of a huge snake. Roaring, it hefted a Yama weapon and lashed out toward Meng Hao with deadly force. It was in that exact moment that Meng Hao's foot touched down with his 5th step, and his energy soared even higher than before. The heavens trembled and the earth quaked. Numerous crevices snaked out over the ground, and one mountain after another began to crumble on the planet below. In response to his surging energy, his cultivation base caused an explosive tempest to rise up, transforming into a barrier that the Yama soul collided with. Immediately, the Yama soul was sent tumbling backward. Unexpectedly, it was completely incapable of doing anything to that barrier. It wasn't even necessary to say anything about it attacking Meng Hao. It couldn't even get within 300 meters of him. The Yama soul wasn't the only thing sent tumbling away. The ancient realm cultivators all coughed up blood when they were hit by the barrier, and there were even some who exploded into bits. Those who weren't killed in body and soul were heavily wounded as they were shoved backward. The cultivators in the great circle of the ancient realm looked on with ashen, shocked faces. "Who are you?" That was the question uttered as Meng Hao's sixth step landed. His energy once again rocketed up, and his cultivation base expanded, causing the invisible barrier to push from 300 meters to 900. Even more cultivators were affected, including immortal realm disciples who were pushed back relentlessly. Many were killed, and the sounds of blood-curdling screams filled the entire planet. By this point, anyone and everyone could tell that whoever this person was, he was astonishingly powerful. Dao realm, he's in the Dao realm. Countless miserable screams could be heard, screams laced with terror. It didn't matter how brutal and fierce these people normally were, their minds were now completely occupied by one thing: fear. Their patriarch might be in the Dao realm, and considered mighty even among Dao realm experts, yet they were still filled with fear. Any Dao realm expert was the type of person to strike indescribable dread into all hearts. Almost in the same moment that people began to cry out, the enormous face formed from black smoke opened its mouth, causing a black wind to seethe out. That black wind contained essence power. Specifically, it was the shocking essence of wind, and even more shockingly, it was intermixed with countless vicious souls whose howls filled the air. Concealed within the all-encompassing wind, the souls shot toward Meng Hao. Now that his power had increased thanks to the sixth step, Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, and then pushed it up into the air as if he were going to push the sky up. Essence of divine flame. Rumbling sounds filled the world as every cloud in the sky disintegrated. This essence was not the color of blood, nor was it black, and not a single soul could be seen within it. What it was filled with was a boundless sea of flames. The flames rolled outwards and became all-encompassing, causing the temperature in the entire world to rapidly reach a scaldingly terrifying level. The sky formed a reservoir for the sea of flames, and the ground became the battlefield. Meng Hao was using the divine flame to counter the soul wind. Essence power erupted out, causing the world to tremble even more violently. Since this was not a true planet, but rather an artificial one molded together from smaller parts, the Dao realm pressure currently weighing down on caused it to show signs of imminent collapse. More and more cracks had spread out over its surface. Then Meng Hao took a seventh step. That step caused his will to merge with the will of the heavens, making him like a deity. His energy surged up in an unprecedented fashion. He had never powered up to such heights before, and truth be told, he hadn't even unleashed his Paragon Bridge yet. This was pure cultivation base power, which was terrifying enough to shake the Dao realm. He now began to grow larger. In the blink of an eye, he was like a giant, fully 3,000 meters tall. The sky began to collapse as he clenched his hand into a fist that then rocketed from the battlefield directly toward the smoke face floating above the black cliff. This was none other than the god-slaying fist. The face in the smoke looked grave. The feeling of intense crisis it got because of Meng Hao was something that only some of the oldest experts in the Eighth Mountain and Sea could match, something that he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. However, he could also tell that this was one of Meng Hao's most powerful attacks, which he was only able to unleash after building up a huge amount of energy. Although the face could fight back against this attack, he didn't see any need to actually do so. All he really had to do was wait for Meng Hao's energy to be spent. Eyes flickering coldly, the face suddenly backed up from Meng Hao's fist strike and began to fade away. As it did, an astute gleam appeared in Meng Hao's eyes. Just as the face had almost completely faded away, his fist suddenly transformed into a palm, which made a grab for the incense burner at the base of the black cliff. His primary goal had never been the extermination of the sect as he had loudly proclaimed, but rather, Chu Yuyan's soul. Everything from before had been carefully executed in such a way that, even if his opponent evaded his blow, he would still be able to grab the incense burner. Similarly, if the man didn't evade, Then Meng Hao was prepared with a follow-up move. Chapter 12:16, Fledgling Mountains and Seas. The smoke-face's eyes widened slightly and then gleamed as it broke into a grin. Voice cold, it said, "So you're here for that after all." As its voice echoed out, it did nothing to stop Meng Hao, but instead allowed his enormous hand to sail directly toward the incense burner at the base of the black cliff. Meng Hao's heart sank and he sighed inwardly. His opponent was a Three Essences Tao Lord, so not only was his cultivation base powerful, he was surely profoundly wise and cunning. Meng Hao knew his plan had been slightly careless, so it was no surprise that the man noticed. However, it also made things slightly more complicated. "So you knew," he said, eyes flickering. "Why does that matter?" Even if the man had picked up on the clues, that wouldn't make Meng Hao to give up on trying to snatch the incense burner. He gave a cold harumph as the hand smashed through the air, causing rumbling sounds and even distorting the air until it was blurry. Just when the hand was about to grab the incense burner, an invisible shield flickered into place. It wasn't until Meng Hao's hand slammed into it that it became visible. The shield was not like an inverted bowl, but more like a net that filled the entire Black Soul Society. If anyone tried to grab the incense burner, then the protective net would appear. His right hand made contact with the huge net, and massive rumbling sounds emanated out. Almost immediately, the force of Meng Hao's blow was absorbed, causing the huge net to glitter radiantly. Blinding light shone out, and intense rumbling could be heard. A mere power of absorption was not the only function of the Black Soul Society's protective net. After absorbing the power, it could then release it in a backlash attack. It shot out from the huge net, converging on a single point, where it prepared to batter Meng Hao with heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing power. That point of convergence was the exact point where Meng Hao was touching the net. "You take my power, augment it, and then fire it back at me, huh?" Meng Hao murmured, shaking as the power slammed into his hand. He suddenly laughed coldly. "Well then, let's see if this protective spell formation is really qualified to stand in my way." Eyes glittering icily, his right hand suddenly snapped open, and he grabbed the net itself. Azure light exploded out in all directions, as did the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal. The ground quaked and majestic crashes of thunder could be heard. Meng Hao roared and pushed forward. As he did, the net began to struggle back and the backlash attack power grew even stronger. "Think you can reflect this one?" It was at this point that something new appeared within him, Paragon power. It was the power of the Paragon Bridge. It didn't manifest externally but rather inside of him. After causing the Paragon Bridge to become corporeal, this was a new way that he could unleash its power. As the power of the Paragon Bridge exploded out inside of him, it became like a celestial bridge which connected every part of his body, causing indescribable power to flow through all of his chi passageways. As soon as that massive power touched the huge net, it permeated its entire structure, which began to vibrate. It wouldn't matter if the net was even stronger than it was now, it was powerless to fight back, and even began to shatter. The Smokeface's expression immediately flickered. At the same time, Meng Hao roared, ripping the net upwards. "Break!" His voice was so loud it could shake the heavens and rock the earth. The surrounding disciples of the Black Soul Society looked on with gaping mouths. They almost couldn't believe that Meng Hao had actually uprooted their protective net. The huge net was hundreds of thousands of meters wide, and as it was lifted into the air it looked almost like a cape. In addition, countless muffled booms could be heard as the entire thing crumbled. Meng Hao then tossed the net to the side, causing it to shatter into pieces which spiraled toward the cultivators of the Black Soul Society. "No!" Countless terrified screams could be heard as the cultivators of the Black Soul Society attempted to back up across the battlefield, their faces flickering with shock. However, their attempts to evade were in vain. Meng Hao was too fast, and when he sent the shattering net sweeping out, the cultivators it hit were instantly shredded to pieces. In a brief moment, the entire battlefield was filled with the reek of fresh blood. The slaughter which was unfolding was happening too quickly, too suddenly. Before anyone could even think or react, the entire area was turned into a scene from hell. As soon as Meng Hao released the net, his hand shot forward toward the incense burner. It didn't matter that his opponent had seen through his plan, and it also didn't matter that this incense burner could potentially be fake. He would still attempt to grab it. It was something he simply must do. However, in the moment that he was about to lay his hand on it, the incense burner suddenly flickered blurrily, and Meng Hao's hand snatched at nothing but air. "Well, in that case, I'll just have to enact Plan B," Meng Hao said coolly. Even as his fingers closed around nothing, they formed into a fist which then punched out toward the black cliff. This action caused the smoke face's expression to fall. He had guessed at why Meng Hao had come here, and thus what actions he would take, and had never considered that he was actually determined to exterminate the Black Soul Society. He had assumed that he would use the threat of sect extermination as a bargaining chip to get what he wanted. How could he ever have guessed that Meng Hao had never intended to do any such thing? When a powerful expert came who threatened to exterminate the disciples of a sect, it wasn't always an unresolvable situation. However, when someone truly set about to destroy the entire sect, that signified that there was some enmity in place that was impossible to dispel. "How dare you?" the smoke face roared, a sound that weighed down like heavenly might, shaking everything in the area. More black smoke converged, but just when it was about to form the shape of a body, Meng Hao's fist made contact with the black cliff. "You watch and see how I dare," he said, his voice cold and filled with determination as his cultivation base exploded out through his fist. That explosive power was backed by all the cultivation base power of an all-heaven Tao immortal, his peak fleshly body power, and his 7 god steps. It even contained the mighty paragon power built up by the paragon bridge inside of him. All of that formed together into the most powerful strike Meng Hao was capable of. Rumbling sounds filled the air and the black cliff shook. Cracking sounds could be heard, and then fissures spread out across the cliff. Suddenly, the black cliff, which represented the highest power in the Black Soul Society, shattered to pieces. As it did, countless souls suddenly flew out up into the sky. A Yellow Springs river appeared in midair, into which the souls merged as they sped in the direction of the 4th mountain to begin the cycle of reincarnation. As the souls merged into the Yellow Springs River, they looked in Meng Hao's direction with appreciative eyes, and would even clasp hands and bow. As for the total number of souls, there were more than 1 billion. Even Meng Hao was shaken by the vastness of the number. He knew that the Black Soul Society was savage, but he had never imagined that they would actually be this savage. Furthermore, many of those souls actually belonged to mortals. "No," howled the surrounding Black Soul Society cultivators, trembling as though their faith had been toppled. And yet things weren't over yet. Meng Hao's display of peak power didn't just destroy the black cliff. As it fell into pieces, the cracks continued to spread out. In the blink of an eye, they reached numerous nearby mountains and buildings, filling the entire Black Soul Society sect. In fact, the entire planet was affected. A cacophony of sound could be heard as mountains toppled and buildings were transformed into ash. In the blink of an eye, the entire Black Soul Society collapsed. A huge crater appeared in the ground, like an enormous mouth that swallowed up the entire sect. Everything about it that existed was completely eradicated. As the sect was destroyed, countless souls flew out from all areas, more and more of them until they blotted out the sky. Seemingly infinite numbers of souls poured into the river of the Yellow Springs, and as they did, all of them expressed their thanks to Meng Hao. There were so many souls that it was literally impossible for Meng Hao to determine how many there were. The collective gratitude of so many souls caused Meng Hao to tremble. It was as if an invisible chi flow were somehow blessing him. As the invisible chi flow built up within him, the drop of Paragon's blood also began to bubble. Suddenly, that bubbling blood caused something to appear in Meng Hao's mind. It was 9 mountains and 9 seas, as well as a sun and a moon. Meng Hao could see all of the living entities in the 9 mountains and 9 seas, regardless of whether they were in the Tao realm or mortals, whether they were the mountain and sea lord or ordinary cultivators. This sudden development caused Meng Hao to stare in shock. The vision only lasted for a moment, but in that brief moment Meng Hao had a feeling like he could actually change the entire mountain and sea realm with a single thought. The sensation vanished almost immediately, and the image of the mountain and sea realm left his mind. Afterward, it almost seemed like a hallucination. "I'm the future lord of the mountain and sea realm." Perhaps exterminating the Black Soul Society really was, as I said, representing the mountain and sea realm to mete out heavenly punishment. Even as those thoughts went through his head, countless disciples of the Black Soul Society around him were roaring. In the same moment, a towering will of rage suddenly exploded out from the depths of the crater into which the Black Soul Society was sinking. The intensity caused colors to flash in the sky and everything to shake. Even the Yellow Springs River suddenly stopped moving, and the countless souls therein began to shiver. Suddenly, shocking black fire erupted out from within the crater. It was like a sea of flames that rapidly took the shape of a face, the same middle-aged man as before. He looked at Meng Hao with a furious expression and said, "Are you looking to die, knave?" Even as the roar echoed out, Meng Hao could see a figure slowly emerging from the flames. As he did, a shocking, explosive power emanated out from him. Chapter 12:17, Patriarch Black Soul. Almost as soon as the man appeared, the surrounding disciples of the Black Soul Society were enlivened and began to cry out in loud voices. "Patriarch! The Patriarch's Dao-might is completely unrivaled. Greetings, Patriarch!" These disciples were terrified of Meng Hao and found his savagery virtually impossible to describe. Were it not for the presence of their patriarch, they would long since have fled in fear. The sect was in ruins, and many of their compatriots were dead, but as long as the patriarch was there, the sect still existed. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as the Black Soul Society's only Dao realm expert emerged from the flames. He was the Three Essences Dao Lord, Patriarch Black Soul. Meng Hao's mouth curled up into a cold smile. The vision he had just experienced regarding the mountain and sea realm had caused many thoughts to rise up in his mind. All of a sudden, he began to back up. That was the first time he had retreated since he had arrived in the Black Soul Society. In the blink of an eye, he was in the middle of the surrounding Black Soul Society disciples. In their shock, they watched Meng Hao wave both hands through the air, summoning numerous immortal mountains. Then, miserable shrieks could be heard as the disciples on either side of him were crushed. It didn't matter how they fought back or resisted. Their cultivation bases were far too weak compared to his, leaving them completely unqualified to resist. It only took a moment for dozens of disciples to be reduced to a bloody mist, as they were completely killed in body and spirit. It wasn't over yet, though. Even as the immortal mountains descended, he performed an incantation gesture and then pointed down toward the ground below. Instantly, the immortal mountains trembled and then, unexpectedly, detonated. Thousands of immortal mountains all exploded, transforming into innumerable fragments that spread out in all directions. The ground shook and the sky lurched. In one brief moment, nearly 10,000 cultivators were wiped out by the power of the explosion. As they died, Meng Hao suddenly sensed the chi flow inside of him growing stronger. This was the same sensation he had experienced moments before, and although he did not see images of the 9 mountains and 9 seas, the feeling was the same. It was also like when he had received the blessing of chi flow in the windswept realm. The main difference was that back then, the chi flow had been given to him by the windswept realm, but now, he was feeling something like the return of a chi flow. It was similar to what had happened in the windswept realm, and yet was fundamentally different. One of those chi flows had been bestowed, while the other already belonged to him. A chi flow return. Meng Hao took a deep breath as hundreds of thoughts ran through his mind. The fact that the chi flow was returning indicated one thing. When all of that chi flow from the mountain and sea realm returned to him, he would be the mountain and sea lord. An enraged roar could then be heard from within the sea of flames. "Are you looking to die?" The sea of flames shot up into the air, transforming into a shooting star of fire. It moved directly toward Meng Hao with shocking speed, closing in on him in an instant, intent on blocking his attack. At the same time, the might of a Three Essences Dao Lord rose up. It quickly became corporeal, turning into something like indestructible city walls which smashed toward Meng Hao. Generally speaking, anyone under the Dao realm would be completely crushed by such pressure. Even Meng Hao couldn't stop his eyes from widening. However, he was an all-heaven Dao immortal, which was fundamentally a defiance of the heavens, and enabled him to rock 2 Essences Dao realm experts. Currently, his eyes flickered as the flame meteor closed in him. Suddenly, he made a grasping motion, causing the lightning cauldron to appear. Electricity danced, and just as the flame meteor was about to engulf him, he switched places with an ancient realm cultivator. Moments ago, this ancient realm cultivator had been fighting the black imps off in the distance, until all of a sudden, he was in a new location. His vision swam, and then the sea of flames caused him to scream as he was engulfed. New. Patriarch Black Soul showed no reaction whatsoever at having killed the wrong person, but his desire to kill Meng Hao climbed to the pinnacle. He was a cautious person, and had originally planned to use the power of the sect as a whole to probe Meng Hao and see what trump cards this daring individual held, who dared to take on a whole sect. But now that Meng Hao had actually already destroyed the Black Soul Society, Patriarch Black Soul's hand was forced, and he personally appeared. As of now, it didn't matter what trump cards Meng Hao might have. he had to show his face. However, after showing up to fight, Meng Hao didn't battle him, but instead began to slaughter his disciples. That caused Patriarch Black Soul's rage to grow even stronger. As the flame meteor shot toward Meng Hao, the figure within the flames stepped forward, instantly spanning the distance between himself and Meng Hao. Then he stretched out his hand violently to grab Meng Hao. That grasping motion caused the natural laws in the area to twist. The land was transformed, as if this will were the will of heaven, as if this Tao were the Tao of heaven, as if this essence could shake the mountains and seas. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. However, even as Patriarch Black Soul appeared in front of him, he waved his finger. Demon Sealing 8th Hex. The hex immediately bound up Patriarch Black Soul. Although he was able to break free almost immediately, that still bought Meng Hao some time, and also interfered with the natural laws, making his effort to supplant the will of heaven become unstable. Meng Hao's lightning cauldron flickered again, and he switched positions with someone further back who was in the great circle of the ancient realm. Without any hesitation, he waved his hand, causing an intense sensation of danger to rise up in the man's mind. Even as the man turned to charge toward him, a swath of divine flame suddenly sprang up and consumed him. A blood-curdling scream rang out as the magnificent Great Circle ancient realm cultivator was wiped out by the divine flame. In the blink of an eye, the charging cultivator was transformed into ash. Not even his nascent divinity could escape, and was completely destroyed. "Damn it," Patriarch Black Soul said, glaring at Meng Hao. Meng Hao was being very troublesome, especially the way he used his lightning cauldron, making it almost impossible to do anything to him. Patriarch Black Soul suddenly snorted coldly, then performed a double-handed incantation gesture and pointed toward the sky. "Fire!" Immediately, the land began to shake and roaring filled the sky. A black sea of flames appeared, which began to sweep out in all directions. Then Patriarch Black Soul pointed down, causing the land to tremble. "Earth!" The shattered lands below began to form together into a soil golem, surrounded by countless drifting motes of dust which swirled around it. "Wind!" Next, Patriarch Black Soul stamped his foot down violently, causing rumbling to echo out as a black wind sprang up. It stoked the sea of flames, causing the fire to rise up, sending a blast of heat across the dust and rubble in the area, giving rise to a massive tempest. Three essences, seal sky and land, melt the heavens become a Tao Lord prison. As soon as the words left Patriarch Black Soul's mouth, the wind, fire, and earth transformed into three sealing marks which covered the entire world. Each essence caused Meng Hao to feel increasing pressure weighing down on him. By the time the third one appeared, he was locked in place in midair. Massive rumbling could be heard as the disciples in Meng Hao's vicinity were forcibly pushed away from him. A tempest caused him to spin in place as Patriarch Black Soul strode toward him through the winds. Then Patriarch Black Soul extended his right hand. His eyes flickered with killing intent as he made to grab Meng Hao. That gesture caused the natural law of heaven and earth to transform. An enormous face appeared, which was none other than Patriarch Black Soul's face. It felt as if the entire world were filled with Patriarch Black Soul's aura, as if his will had replaced the natural laws. It was as if this small portion of the universe, and its Tao of heaven, had been completely replaced by Patriarch Black Soul. This was the most terrifying aspect of Tao Lords. They could become the lords of the world in which they existed. Furthermore, they were the lords of the Tao of heaven there. That was why three essences Tao realm cultivators were referred to as Tao Lords. "How will you flee now? How will you exterminate my Black Soul Society disciples now?" Patriarch Black Soul's voice echoed out, causing the disciples Meng Hao had just been slaughtering to roar excitedly in support of their patriarch. Their voices joined together like thunder, and their killing intent merged and radiated out as they waited in anticipation for their patriarch to eradicate Meng Hao. However, even as Patriarch Black Soul neared Meng Hao, and the hand that superseded the Tao of heaven appeared in front of him, Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and he stretched both hands out to his sides. Scintillating light suddenly shone out as a hand-sized clump of dirt suddenly shot out from Meng Hao's bag of holding, and he responded to Patriarch Black Soul. "I'll kill your disciples and then you'll know." As soon as the clump appeared, it began to grow with wild speed. Soon it was 300 meters, then 3,000 and then 30,000. It was indescribably heavy, and all of that weight instantly bore down onto Patriarch Black Soul. It slammed into his hand, causing a huge boom to echo out. At the same time, Meng Hao was hit with a backlash attack, causing blood to spray out of his mouth and his body to tremble on the verge of collapse. However, he forced himself to resist, and his eyes gleamed with a vicious expression. He looked at Patriarch Black Soul, who was currently facing the 30,000-meter landmass, his face flickering. An intense sensation of deadly crisis exploded out within Patriarch Black Soul as he realized how indescribably heavy the land mass was. It was so heavy that it could even crush natural laws. It didn't matter that Patriarch Black Soul had replaced the will of the world he was in. That 30,000-meter land mass was like a dull blade that could cut a hole in the entire world with its weight alone. That's a piece of the ruins of immortality. Patriarch Black Soul's face fell, and he immediately fell back. However, the land mass continued to descend. Completely ignoring the tempest of three essences, it crushed down toward the surface of the planet itself. From down below, the land mass was like an enormous shadow, rumbling downward. All of the cultivators who saw it were completely astonished and began to cry out in alarm. What is that? Let's get out of here. The Black Soul Society disciples that were currently in the shadow of the descending land mass held nothing back in their attempts to flee. However, the shadow itself seemed to have some strange, magnetic power that made it impossible for them to flee. All they could do was scream in despair and look at the enormous darkness growing larger and larger above them. And then, they were crushed. Chapter 12:18, Mutual Deception. Massive rumbling could be heard, as the 30,000-meter chunk of the ruins of immortality crushed the Black Soul Society disciples beneath it to death. Simultaneously, an intense shockwave spread out from the place where it landed, filling the entire planet. A massive blast of wind surged out, engulfing heaven and earth. Countless mountains were ripped up, and numerous rivers were transformed into raindrops. It was as if the entire planet had been punched. The disciples in the periphery were smashed by the shockwave and sent tumbling out of control through the air, blood spraying from their mouths. It was an incredible spectacle. The ground on the entire planet trembled and then sank downward. Massive fissures spread out and cracking sounds could be heard. The planet had already been destabilized, and it was now showing signs that it would collapse. It was as if it had been pushed beyond the point where it could endure any longer and would begin to crumble at any moment. The Black Soul Society disciples on the surface were hit by a deafening roar. Blood sprayed out of their mouths. They were struck dead on impact. Those who survived were now numb with fear. Trembling, they began to scream, and soon all of them were in full retreat. Unfortunately for them, all of the teleportation portals had been sealed tight, but even so they chose to attempt an escape. The all-consuming shadow of death loomed within the hearts of all present. Patriarch Black Soul's face fell. Never in his wildest conjectures could he ever have imagined that Meng Hao would actually possess a part of the rarely seen ruins of immortality, here in the 8th mountain. Even as the planet showed signs that it was beginning to collapse, and the disciples of the Black Soul Society were scattering in terror, killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. "Terracotta soldier," he growled, "your presence is requested." Instantly, the terracotta soldier appeared from within the 30,000-meter chunk of the ruins of immortality, which was still crushing down into the planet. It leaped into the air, transforming into a beam of light that shot out of the ruins to appear directly in front of one of the disciples of the Black Soul Society. It waved its hand, sweeping its greatsword through the air in a flash of flickering light. Instantly, an enemy was killed. The terracotta soldier's eyes flickered, and it attacked again. Quasi-Dao puppet. Patriarch Black Soul's face flickered and shot toward the terracotta soldier to destroy it. However, this time Meng Hao didn't fall back, but instead attacked. He stepped forward, transforming into an azure-colored rock that shot toward Patriarch Black Soul with incredible speed. Patriarch Black Soul's eyes flickered with killing intent. He hated the terracotta soldier which was slaughtering his disciples, but he hated Meng Hao even more. "When I kill you, that Quasi-Dao puppet will belong to me," he said, spinning in place. The wave of a sleeve caused the power of flame essence to erupt out, transforming his surroundings into a sea of flames. A wind sprang up, and soil materialized. The power of 3 essences exploded out, transforming into visible killing intent that shot toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. He still had not utilized his all-powerful Paragon Bridge, nor his battle weapon. Instead, he performed an incantation gesture, sending the essence of divine flame out, backed by the will of an all-heaven Tao immortal. He was relying on his own power alone to fight the 3 essences of Patriarch Black Soul. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he fell back. Patriarch Black Soul grinned maliciously and advanced. As he neared, Meng Hao waved his right index finger, causing the 8th demon sealing hex to appear. After that was the 7th hex, the 6th hex, and the 5th hex, all in quick succession. Patriarch Black Soul lurched to a stop in midair. Karma threads appeared around him, and soul blood flew out from his forehead. A massive rift opened up in front of him, which emanated the power of the inside-outside hex as it tried to consume him. All of this happened in a brief moment. Meng Hao threw his head back and roared, and his energy surged up as he fused with the starstone in his eye and transformed into a shooting star, surrounded by scorching divine flame, swirling immortal mountains, and even the explosive power of the sun and moon. It was even possible to see the faint image of 9 mountains. Meng Hao was apparently using his most powerful divine abilities to attack Patriarch Black Soul. They closed in with rapid speed as Patriarch Black Soul threw his head back and roared. He waved his arm, casting off all the hexing magics, then waved his right index finger out, tapping Meng Hao's shooting star form. "That Quasar puppet and these magical techniques are your trump cards, huh?" Patriarch Black Soul said coldly. "I can crush them in an instant." As his finger tapped down onto the shooting star, cracks spread out, and the one-thought stellar transformation formed from Meng Hao's starstone collapsed into pieces. However, as that happened, Meng Hao appeared, his right hand already transformed into the battle weapon. Shockingly, he had used the starstone to hide the transformed copper mirror. As soon as the power of the starstone fell apart, Meng Hao's killing intent skyrocketed, as if he had been holding back and building it up. All of a sudden, his blade was flashing like lightning toward Patriarch Black Soul. The attack was completely unexpected, and was backed by the terrifying power of numerous natural laws. Suddenly, fear welled up within Patriarch Black Soul's heart. He fell back rapidly, causing his cultivation base to explode out with its full power. He also called upon the full power of his essences to attempt to block the blade. A massive boom rang out, and scintillating light shone out as if the heavens were being split open. Blood oozed out of Patriarch Black Soul's mouth. However, a mocking gleam could be seen in his eyes. Although the slash of the blade wounded him in a way that didn't heal, it was only a slight wound. After all, Patriarch Black Soul was a very cautious person. Everything he had been doing so far was an attempt to get Meng Hao to use his trump cards. He wanted to know for sure exactly what made Meng Hao so confident that he would take the Black Soul Society on alone. Stupid people could not practice cultivation to his level, not knowing exactly what trump cards his opponent had left him in a state of unease. "So this is your trump card," Patriarch Black Soul said coldly. "Not bad. Unfortunately, although it's pretty good, you used it at the wrong time. Or perhaps it's better to say that it doesn't really matter how you use it. I have already taken precautions against something like that. You are doomed to be defeated." Now that he felt a bit less on edge, he smiled viciously and waved his finger through the air. Rumbling could be heard, and the air distorted as a huge incense burner suddenly appeared above his head. "Well then, now it's my turn to attack and extract your soul." In the instant that the incense burner appeared, Meng Hao looked at it closely. After confirming that it was what he was looking for, a grin appeared on his face, along with an emotional sigh. "Well, it took long enough," he murmured softly, "and I even had to reveal my battle weapon. Finally you pull it out." As soon as the words left his mouth, Patriarch Black Soul gaped in shock. Note from Deathblade: when I finished translating this chapter, I was amazed because of the record time it took to finish it. I translated it in a little over half the time it normally takes me. I even proudly told Madame Deathblade about this accomplishment. That was before I read the note of apology from Urgen, which said that the chapter is only about 2-3 the size of a normal chapter. It was about 2,000 words instead of 3,000, which translated to about 1,200 words instead of 2,000. Chapter 12:19, Planet Black Soul Crumble. In almost the exact same moment that Patriarch Black Soul's face fell, Meng Hao lifted his right hand. A strange gleam flickered in his eyes as he pointed up toward the heavens. "Paragon? Bridge," he said softly. Rumbling sounds could be heard coming from inside Meng Hao himself, and suddenly everyone could see something inside his body. Not even his clothing could cover up the bright arc of light that stretched from the top of his head all the way to his Danshan region and formed a bridge. A spectacular bridge hidden inside his body, almost like a chi meridian. Then, the bridge materialized up in the sky. The Paragon Bridge. RUMMMBLLLE. Massive rumbling could be heard as the sky collapsed, the space it had occupied now completely filled by the Paragon Bridge. It radiated awe-inspiring might and a dazzling glow. The countless magical symbols which covered its surface glittered, and the bridge was so large that anyone who saw it couldn't help but stare with wide eyes. What magic is this? The fleeing disciples of the Black Soul Society gasped and stared, eyes wide with disbelief. Patriarch Black Soul was also gaping. Based on the level of his cultivation base, he knew what he was looking at and cried out in alarm. Paragon magic, why you're in the echelon. At the same time that his voice echoed out, pressure exploded out from the Paragon Bridge, crushing down onto the lands, causing the entire world to tremble. Instantly, Patriarch Black Soul was engulfed by massive force. He trembled, and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. Not only was he terrified by the pressure that was crushing down onto him, his body was physically shaking. A terrifying sensation rose up in his heart, and he sensed an indescribable feeling of deadly crisis. That sensation told him that if he tried to fight against this Paragon Bridge, there was a great risk that he would perish. Impossible. Even the Paragon magic of the echelon isn't this powerful. This is impossible. At the same time that Patriarch Black Soul was completely shaken, a glowing beam shot out from the Paragon Bridge, a dazzling light filled with Paragon power. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped the incense burner which floated above Patriarch Black Soul's head. The incense burner began to vibrate, and was then slowly dragged toward the Paragon Bridge. "Get back here," Patriarch Black Soul growled. He might be experiencing a sensation of deadly crisis and might have been shaken by the Paragon Bridge, but he was still a Three Essences Tao Lord. He was the overlord of this world, a person who had fought countless battles throughout his life. Despite being surprised, but he still let out a vicious roar, causing his divine sense to spring out and prevent the incense burner from being taken. He had realized earlier that his opponent had come for the incense burner, and he had no intention of letting him take it. In the instant that Patriarch Black Soul roared, Meng Hao extended his hand and made a grasping motion toward the incense burner. The star-plucking magic was unleashed, which combined with the power of the Paragon Bridge, causing the incense burner to be dragged rapidly toward Meng Hao. "That's my treasure, the legacy of the Black Soul Society. You think you can just take it away?" Patriarch Black Soul bit the tip of his tongue and spit out some blood. Then he roared, causing the incense burner to stop in place. Despite the power of the Paragon magic, it suddenly began to fly back in the direction of Patriarch Black Soul. Meng Hao frowned and his eyes flickered icily. With a cold harumph, he stepped forward and appeared on top of the Paragon Bridge, where he stamped down violently with his right foot. The Paragon Bridge rumbled, and the light surrounding it spread out in all directions. The pressure from the bridge then increased to the absolute maximum Meng Hao was capable of unleashing. That amount of crushing force could shake heaven and earth. The planet had already been in a state of imminent collapse, but now it couldn't endure any longer. Massive rumbling could be heard, as the surface of the planet crumbled completely. Massive chunks of land were hurled about wildly, and intense crashing sounds could be heard as cracks spread out everywhere. Mountains were leveled, and rivers evaporated. The countless fleeing Black Soul Society disciples on the planet were experiencing an apocalypse, and none of them possessed the wherewithal to successfully escape it. In the blink of an eye, the cultivators began to scream as the power of planetary destruction completely pulverized them. Even more were consumed by the fissures forming in the crumbling lands around them, and some actually exploded into clouds of blood and gore from the pressure emanating from the bridge. The few cultivators who somehow managed to evade death would suddenly find themselves facing the terracotta soldier, which swung its greatsword and slaughtered any escapees. The entire planet that housed the Black Soul Society was experiencing a doomsday. The destruction of the lands accelerated and the sky collapsed. The entire planet looked like a clenched fist that was now quickly opening up. "Crumble," Meng Hao cried, pushing his hand downward. That gesture caused the pressure coming from the Paragon Bridge to increase by a full order of magnitude, ensuring that the entire planet was completely destroyed. The whole planet was collapsing. Countless fragments shot out into the starry sky as a massive force exploded out from the planet itself. It exploded, sending a huge shockwave blasting out in all directions. Without exception, all of the Black Soul Society disciples were hit, causing blood to spray out in all directions as their bodies were shredded. The entire planet was now reduced to countless fragments, which floated out into the starry sky. The only things that remained were wreckage, corpses, and chunks of gore. The reek of blood hung heavy over the area, and it seemed as if it would never dissipate for all eternity. Patriarch Black Soul stared in shock and coughed up a mouthful of blood. His body withered a bit and began to tremble. His mouth opened, and a strange sound could be heard, as if he had thousands of things he wanted to say, but they were all stuck in his throat. In the moment that the planet collapsed and the blood sprayed from his mouth, the incense burner which he had been attempting to wrest control of was wrenched away by Meng Hao and the Paragon Bridge. In a bright beam of colorful light, the incense burner flew toward Meng Hao, shrank down, and landed in his palm. In that instant, Meng Hao shivered as he sensed some familiar fluctuations coming from inside the light. However, whether it was because they were inside the incense burner or because of other reasons, those fluctuations were very faint. So faint, in fact, that they seemed to be on the verge of fading away completely. For some reason, Meng Hao felt uneasy. However, there was no time to investigate the matter now. Planetary debris was floating about in all directions, and in the middle of it all was a bridge upon which stood Meng Hao. Beneath that bridge was Patriarch Black Soul, trembling violently, eyes completely bloodshot, seemingly on the verge of going mad. He looked around at the destroyed planet that had once housed the Black Soul Society and all of the dead disciples. The sect which he had personally built up was now fading away into the starry sky. The sight caused him to tremble and throw his head back and let out the most piercing of howls. "Child, I won't rest until you are dead." As the sound of his howl echoed out in all directions, his energy surged up. His hair was thrown into disarray as he went completely mad. Staring dead at Meng Hao, he charged an attack. Essence power erupted around him, causing Meng Hao's eyes to widen. Of course, he was well aware that his action of destroying this planet would catch the attention of the Heaven God Alliance. In fact, he probably didn't have very much time left before the Alliance's almighty experts showed up. Meng Hao sighed. He had chosen to destroy the planet because he had no other alternative. That was the only way to inflict serious damage to Patriarch Black Soul, and thus lay hands on the incense burner. "I've got to end this quickly." Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent. He quickly placed a sealing mark on the incense burner and put it away, then lifted his right hand high into the air, causing the battle weapon to appear once more as a shocking blade. Rumble! Meng Hao's energy surged up and then exploded out, causing a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering murderous aura to transform him into something like a celestial warrior. Next, the meat jelly flew out of his bag of holding, transforming into a suit of armor. His energy once again exploded up, creating a tempest that swept all the dust and rubble around him away. A red beam of light flew out, which was the mastiff. As it became a cape, Meng Hao threw his head back and roared, and an intense, bloody glow erupted up. Then he lifted up his left hand, within which was his fourth nirvana fruit, which he pushed down onto his forehead. As it merged into him, rumbling filled his mind and the world around him changed. The rubble of the planet, the starry sky, all turned azure. As Meng Hao stood on the Paragon Bridge, he suddenly breathed in sharply, which caused the Paragon Bridge to immediately flare with boundless light. A sensation of unbridled supremacy emanated from it, which was sucked in and absorbed by Meng Hao, so that it seemed as if he were a living, breathing paragon. As Patriarch Black Soul closed in, Meng Hao performed a tremendous downward slash toward him with the battle weapon. This was his most powerful state and his most powerful strike. He was at the pinnacle. The starry sky seemed to lurch to a stop. Natural laws scattered. Time seemed to come to a standstill in the eighth mountain and sea. The only thing that remained within the starry sky was the long blade, radiating brilliant light, as it flashed toward Patriarch Black Soul. Patriarch Black Soul threw his head back and roared, waving both hands. Suddenly, he exploded, causing flesh and blood to burst about. It transformed into a blood mist from within which surged a seemingly endless amount of souls. Black Soul Heaven Slaughter. A droning sound could be heard as seemingly endless numbers of souls filled the starry sky, spreading out to fill nearly half of the starry sky above the Heaven God Alliance. The shocking sight caused all of the planets within the affected area to tremble. Countless Heaven God Alliance cultivators who were in meditative trances opened their eyes and looked up in shock. In that moment, countless streams of divine sense swept through the void toward the area where Meng Hao and Patriarch Black Soul were fighting. The Heaven God Alliance was thrown into a huge commotion. Chapter 12:20. When rivals face off, victory goes to the brave. The blood mist formed from Patriarch Black Soul's body used his essence blood to release the souls that he had refined over countless years of cultivation. The seemingly infinite amount of souls exploded out into the starry sky, where they transformed into an enormous mask. The mask of souls writhed, and shrill screams could be heard, as if the souls wished to consume all things to dispel their pain. The screams they uttered could not be heard by living things. They were screams born of death, and resulted only in boundless, amorphous ripples. The ripples spread out through the starry sky as if over the surface of water. As the rings expanded, natural laws trembled and fell into retreat. Even the will of the mountain and sea realm seemed to flee from the affected area. Gradually, a shocking image of the underworld appeared. The yellow springs could be seen, as well as the cycle of reincarnation, along with the images of countless evil ghosts. More shocking than that was that behind the ghosts could be seen numerous, enormous tombs. The tombs were all illusory, and it was almost as if the excessive number of souls in the area had caused them to descend. As the tombs appeared, they became a backdrop that served to emphasize the size of the mask. Everything that was happening made the strangeness of the soul mask and its formidability seem more pronounced. Furthermore, it had such a terrifying aura that Meng Hao's pupils constricted. This was the explosive power of a three essences Dao Lord, someone who could shake heaven and earth. Meng Hao had been in mortal danger from the moment he had arrived in the Black Soul Society, but now that level of danger increased dramatically. The sensation of crisis he was experiencing told him that this battle, and especially this attack, could end with him perishing. But the danger is mutual, he said, eyes glittering viciously. He always treated both himself and others with incredible viciousness. If he felt the inclination to back down for even a moment during this fight, then he would be dead for sure. The only option was to reject the option of retreat and to keep fighting. After all, when rivals face off, victory goes to the brave. Meng Hao's eyes shone with a strange light, and he didn't back down in the least. All of the peak level of power in him converged on the battle weapon, which slashed through the starry sky with scintillating light as he slashed it down. The soul mask let out an intense roar as it slammed into the most powerful of Meng Hao's attacks, the slash of the battle weapon. A huge boom could be heard, and a massive explosion rumbled out for 50,000 kilometers in every direction, then 500,000 kilometers, then 5 million. By now, more than half of the Heaven God Alliance could sense the ripples. The streams of divine sense which had converged in the area were instantly distorted by the explosive outburst, and then shattered. The surrounding dust and rubble vibrated, and then transformed into ash, which slowly faded away. The battle between Meng Hao and Patriarch Black Soul was releasing far too much power. The starry sky trembled and began to crack apart. Suddenly, an enormous black hole appeared right between Meng Hao and Patriarch Black Soul. Everything shook and trembled violently. Endless amounts of Patriarch Black Soul's countless screaming souls were wiped away. And yet, he used the remaining souls he had to disregard all danger and charge toward Meng Hao. He slammed into Meng Hao, who trembled violently in response. The cape separated from his back, transforming into the mastiff, who coughed up a mouthful of blood. Meng Hao was now in far more danger than before. There was even a voice inside of him yelling at him to flee, to escape, to stop fighting lest he be killed. And yet he gritted his teeth, ignored the voice inside, and continued to fight. He knew that in this battle he couldn't back down. He had to fight and keep fighting until the very end. Whoever could walk that narrow line between life and death would be the victor. Rumbling could be heard as more and more of the souls in Patriarch Black Soul's soul mask collapsed. Each soul that collapsed sent pain into Patriarch Black Soul's mind, but he also held on. He was filled with an obsessive desire to strike down Meng Hao. "Die!" screamed the converged voices of all the souls in the soul mask. "Are you mmmmblllly?" Meng Hao's meat jelly suit of armor was torn off of him. Numerous streams of light swirled out to form together behind Meng Hao in the form of the meat jelly, who looked incredibly listless. Meng Hao coughed up some more blood. His body was now a mass of completely mangled flesh. And yet he held on. Patriarch Black Soul was also trembling. Despite the severe loss of souls, he used what he had left to charge madly toward Meng Hao. From a distance, it would look like Meng Hao was hovering alone in the starry sky, surrounded by a boundless sea of souls. He was holding on, as was the sea of souls. However, it was at this moment that a tremor ran through him, and his fourth nirvana fruit was forced out of his forehead. When that happened, Meng Hao was severely weakened. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and yet his momentum didn't falter. Eyes bloodshot, clearly weaker than before, he lifted his foot up and took a step forward. That step represented his determination, and also his ruthlessness. As he took that step, Patriarch Black Soul's consciousness began to blur, and yet, boundless ripples exploded out from the sea of souls. Both of them were almost completely drained and were waiting to see who could hold on longer. "Die-ye!" screamed Patriarch Black Soul's countless souls. As they howled, they burst into flames, increasing their attacking power. Some of them even landed on Meng Hao and began to voraciously attempt to consume him. As Patriarch Black Soul continued to fight, every soul of his that died was like a powerful mental blow. And yet, he held on, his obsession burning like an undying fire. Meng Hao was racked with pain as the souls gnawed at his flesh and tore out bloody chunks to reveal the bones beneath. Then the souls began to chew on the bones, even boring into his body to eat his organs. The scene which was playing out was extremely shocking. To be eaten alive in such a way was something ordinary people would never be able to endure. But Meng Hao simply frowned and ignored the souls. He rotated his cultivation base, causing his qi and blood to surge, crushing the voracious, evil souls like a giant millstone. Soon, his entire body was a mass of bloody gore. By now, Meng Hao's power was severely lacking, and his Paragon Bridge, which was also the subject of suicidal attack by Patriarch Black Soul's numerous souls, was forced back inside his body. The instant the Paragon Bridge vanished, the souls let out piercing shrieks and pounced on Meng Hao. He was now completely engulfed by wild, ravenous souls. The battle weapon began to fall apart, but just before it faded away, Meng Hao coughed up a mouthful of blood and then slashed down one more time. "Patriarch Black Soul, do you have the courage to die together with me?" The souls which formed Patriarch Black Soul had been rapidly fading away, from 10 million to 1 million to the current 100,000. A huge boom could be heard as the souls were shaken off of Meng Hao, either destroyed or sent spinning away. Patriarch Black Soul once again appeared, although he had no body left, only a screaming nascent divinity. He was now completely terrified of Meng Hao. He had never encountered someone as vicious as this. Moments ago, Meng Hao had been completely engulfed by souls, which had instantly started to chomp away at his bones and organs. That was a type of pain that very few people could endure. And yet, even in such a state, Meng Hao made a counterattack. That was something even more rarely seen. Damn it, when did someone as vicious as this show up in the 8th mountain and sea? He's definitely not a local cultivator. He must be from another mountain and sea. Patriarch Black Soul was trembling internally, and had apparently regained his senses from the anguish caused by seeing his sect destroyed. Finally, he began to think reasonably. Without any further hesitation, he ceased any thoughts of attacking Meng Hao and simply fled. When rivals meet, victory goes to the brave, and in this case, Patriarch Black Soul was the one who backed down. That wasn't what he wanted to do, but he had no other choice. His heart was pounding in fear, and his mind was filled with terror. He might be a Three Essences Tao Lord, but right now, he was the one who was scared. He was completely shaken by Meng Hao's viciousness, completely moved by his determination. Meng Hao's madness caused Patriarch Black Soul to feel almost as if the person whose sect had just been exterminated was not himself, but actually Meng Hao. "Crazy?" he cried. "You're just a lunatic. Damn it. You don't deserve to have me die together with you, but I swear that I will pay back the enmity of this day upon you 100-fold. Roaring defiantly, Patriarch Black Soul's nascent divinity fled at top speed. It wasn't that he didn't dare to keep fighting, but rather that he feared dying. He didn't even want to die while delivering a fatal blow to his enemy. Seeing that Patriarch Black Soul was fleeing, Meng Hao almost began to give chase. However, after he took a single step, he trembled and stopped in place. Roughly 70% of his entire body was nothing more than bones, and of those bones, 30% were broken and shattered. His was completely covered with bite marks, and one of his eyes had even been ripped out. His internal organs were also severely damaged. In terms of physical appearance, he looked horrifying. Without his eternal stratum constantly replenishing his life force, Meng Hao would have long since passed away. The battle weapon faded away and his body suddenly seemed to age. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and his mangled organs shifted. Meng Hao sagged and his aura weakened. Based on his current battle prowess, he was not a match for a Three Essences Tao Lord, not without the Paragon Bridge. And yet, even with the Paragon Bridge and his various powerful divine abilities, he still couldn't manage to cut down a Three Essences Tao Lord. In the end, they were evenly matched. He wanted to give chase, but it was impossible. Even more importantly, the numerous streams of divine sense in the area indicated that almighty experts from the Heaven God Alliance were currently rushing in his direction. He had been aware all along that his actions would arouse the wrath of the Heaven God Alliance, and as of now, it would only be moments before the area would be filled with countless cultivators, who would then lock down the entire region. He looked at the direction in which Patriarch Blacksoul was fleeing, eyes flickering coldly. Finally, he turned and left. Moments later, numerous beams of colorful light filled the area. In the lead position was a man in a violet robe, whose aura placed him in the Tao realm. Send orders to the entire Heaven God Alliance. Lock down all exit routes within Alliance territory. All Alliance cultivators in the ancient realm and higher are to be mobilized to kill the foreign cultivator. The old man swished his sleeve, using a special technique to spread a message to all regions of the Heaven God Alliance. /expand. Even as the old man spoke, a screen materialized in front of him, which began to replay the battle between Meng Hao and Patriarch Blacksoul. At one point, the old man waved his finger, causing the moving images to pause and clearly display Meng Hao's face. However, the old man didn't take time to study Meng Hao. Instead, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he waved his right hand, causing the image to vanish, leaving behind nothing more than a strand of white qi. Voice cool, the old man said. Appearances can change, blood can be altered, and auras can be transformed. However, the fragrance of a soul is something that can never be changed. A large number of cultivators had already begun to gather around him, but none of them spoke. They simply looked at him respectfully. The old man reached out and grabbed the white strand of qi, then clenched his hand down viciously. When he opened it, a white crystal could be seen. He waved his hand, causing the white crystal to split into 2 parts, which then became 4, then 8. In a very brief period of time, 100,000 crystals could be seen. All but a few hundred of the 100,000 white crystals made a droning sound as they spread out in all directions, quickly vanishing into the void as they headed toward the various sects of the Heaven God Alliance. If you get close to the foreigner, the crystal will react. Patriarch Blacksoul has asked it to be made known that if anyone can slay this person, he is willing to become their slave for 1,000 years. With that, the old man turned and headed off into the distance. The cultivators behind him clasped hands respectfully. Afterward, they grabbed the white crystals, and their eyes shone with a strange light. Finally, they dispersed as they began to search for Meng Hao. The entire Heaven God Alliance was set in motion. Soon, news began spreading about the foreign cultivator who had single-handedly exterminated the entire Blacksoul society, even collapsing their planet. Most important was the news about Patriarch Blacksoul being seriously injured himself, which spread through the Heaven God Alliance like wildfire. Countless hearts were completely shaken. After all, the bounty offered by the Heaven God Alliance was 1,000 years of servitude by Patriarch Blacksoul, who was a 3 Essences Tao Lord. That was something that both individual cultivators and even entire sects could not possibly be unmoved by. It was far better than some physical treasure or access to a special technique. Furthermore, no one needed to worry about being cheated. If Patriarch Blacksoul was the type of person who wouldn't honor the agreement, the Heaven God Alliance wouldn't have agreed to issue the bounty to begin with. Most importantly, if the person who wiped out the Blacksoul Society had done so without being injured, then many people would have chosen to just sit back and watch what happened. However, according to the information provided by the Heaven God Alliance, he was actually severely injured and could not unleash cultivation base power that exceeded the mid-ancient realm. Even Patriarch Blacksoul had attested to that. As such, all of the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance were thrown into a state of madness. Numerous individuals sprang into action and began to hunt through the Heaven God Alliance's territory. Virtually, all teleportation portals in the Heaven God Alliance were sealed, and those which could not be sealed were heavily guarded. Anyone who wanted to leave would be thoroughly inspected. As time passed, the news about the extermination of the Blacksoul Society spread outside of the Heaven God Alliance, to be heard by the Han clan and the Ming clan and all the other sects in the 8th Mountain and Sea. Everyone was completely shocked. Furthermore, everyone was speculating about who this person was that the Heaven God Alliance was hunting. After a bit of investigation was done, news spread that he was not a cultivator from the 8th Mountain and Sea, but rather from another of the mountains and seas. Also, he was an echelon cultivator with paragon magic. With so much news spreading about, it wasn't long before Meng Hao's name came to be known by the powerful sects and clans. Matters had already reached the point where no further verification was required. Meng Hao was the person who had exterminated the Blacksoul Society. There was one thing that Meng Hao had no way of knowing, which was that after the Battle of the Windswept Realm, when all the echelon cultivators returned to their respective mountains and seas, numerous powerful sects had begun keeping records and files about Meng Hao. Currently, Patriarch Blacksoul was on one of the planets in the Heaven God Alliance, having reformed a new body. Although his face was ashen, when he saw the image of Meng Hao being shown to him on the screen, he began to shake, and his eyes glowed with madness and killing intent. That's definitely him. Two middle-aged cultivators stood near Patriarch Blacksoul. They wore unique clothing, long white robes marked with lightning symbols. Within each of those lightning symbols was a person who was clearly in the midst of transcending tribulation. Taoist robes like these were only worn by members of the Heaven God Society. The Heaven God Society formed the nucleus of the Heaven God Alliance. They occupied the peak of the Eighth Mountain and Sea, and in fact, the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea resided in the Heaven God Palace. There were many rumors floating around the Eighth Mountain and Sea regarding their lord, who was Heaven God. According to the rumors, he was linked to the Ming clan in numerous ways. However, it was also possible that those were distorted rumors caused because of the general decline of the Ming clan in recent years. Other rumors stated that the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea also had Han clan blood in his veins. Some people even claimed that the Lord of the Eighth Mountain and Sea was a rogue cultivator who had reached the Tao realm. Currently, the two middle-aged men wearing those unique Taoist robes exchanged a glance, then put the screen away. They had been ordered to come here and show the image on the screen to Patriarch Blacksoul for verification purposes. Now that they had the answer to their question, they turned to leave. Patriarch Blacksoul gritted his teeth and clasped hands respectfully to the two cultivators. Many thanks, fellow Taoists from the Heaven God Society. This man must die. He is far too vicious and sinister. He is an outrage to gods and men alike. His heart was filled with bitterness. Because of the level of his cultivation base and his status, he should not have to be doing things like this. At the moment, though, he was like a stray dog. His soul was halfway dispersed and his cultivation base was unstable, leaving him with no other choice than to bow his head in deference. The entire Heaven God Alliance was now searching for Meng Hao. And yet, as time passed, not one scrap of information about him turned up. People were starting to get impatient because of the sealed teleportation portals. It would soon reach the point where it would become a big inconvenience to the Heaven God Alliance as a whole. Furthermore, Patriarch Blacksoul could only influence the policy-making of the Alliance up to a point. The fact that Patriarch Blacksoul had been firm about offering himself up to be a slave for 1,000 years changed matters significantly. The search would have been carried out either way, and there still would have been some form of bounty. If Meng Hao showed his face publicly, he still would have been killed. However, if it wasn't for Patriarch Blacksoul's offer, the Alliance-wide lockdown would have long since been lifted. Every day that those teleportation portals remained sealed caused the Heaven God Alliance to sustain significant financial losses. Before departing, one of the two middle-aged men turned to Patriarch Blacksoul and said, "At the most, the portals will remain sealed for 10 days. If he hasn't been found by then, they will be opened again. Don't worry, though. As long as he remains in the Eighth Mountain and Sea, he'll be found eventually." Meanwhile, in the territory of the Heaven God Alliance, on one of the 4 planets that orbited the Eighth Mountain, a planet called Planet Luo River, there was a capital city of an empire of mortals. Countless mortals lived there, going about their daily lives. As evening fell, a donkey could be seen on the public highway, braying and snorting complacently as it walked along. The donkey had virtually no fur, with only a few patches to be seen here and there. It actually looked very down and out, and yet for some reason seemed to view itself as a very high and mighty figure. A young scholar sat on the donkey, wearing a scholar's traveling case on his back, which was filled with various reading materials. In fact, the young man was engrossed in reading as he rode along on the donkey. 1. Whenever I think about traveling scholars, the first image that pops into my mind is the main character of a Chinese ghost story, who wears a traveling case just like this one. Here's another picture. P.S. If you haven't seen a Chinese ghost story before, you should put it on your list of movies to check out. It's described as a supernatural horror movie, but has a lot of wuxia and Xianxia elements. The scholar had skin as fair as jade and was handsome. He appeared to be a teenager and wore a faded white garment. He and the donkey proceeded along under the evening sun. Occasionally, some swiftly galloping horses would pass him on the public highway, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. The scholar would cover his nose with his sleeve and then wave the dust away. As for the mule, it would look very irritated and then suddenly burst out in a fit of speed as if to catch up. However, after running for only a little bit, it would lazily slow down. Time passed, and the rays of the evening sun were beginning to fade away. However, it was at this point that a town appeared up ahead. Apparently the scholar didn't even notice, however, and continued to take advantage of the fading light to read the bamboo scroll he held in his hands. Occasionally, beams of colorful light would shoot through the sky up ahead. In fact, the power of divine sense was currently sweeping across the lands, and even touched the scholar. However, it passed right over him. Apparently, the mortals of planet Luo River weren't afraid of cultivators. Throughout the entire day, similar beams of light had appeared on dozens of occasions. Although the mortals had looked up in envy and admiration, they didn't seem frightened at all. Currently, one such beam of light had just disappeared off into this distance. Finally, the scholar put down the bamboo scroll, stretched, and then noticed the town, which was getting closer and closer. He smiled, although deep within that smile could be seen a sharp coldness. This scholar was the very person that the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance were searching for high and low, Meng Hao. After his initial flight, he knew that it would be difficult to completely evade the Heaven God Alliance, so he acted on one of the backup plans that he had thought up in advance, hiding himself on the closest of the 4 planets, which was planet Luo River. With the help of the meat jelly and the parrot, and the feather they had acquired years ago, he had concealed the fluctuations of his soul and aura, transforming himself into a scholar. There was no other identity that gave him such a sense of familiarity. I never imagined that I would once again become a scholar traveling to take the imperial examinations, he murmured. The donkey was apparently not very happy, and to make that clear, it suddenly twisted its neck in a complete circle, then continued to twist it several times until its eyes started to bulge out. Meng Hao slapped it on the rump. Have you ever seen any donkeys that can twist their necks around several times over? Meng Hao growled. Come on, let's be a bit more realistic here. People are trying to track us down and kill us, you know. If they find us, it'll be bad luck for the 2 of you as well. The donkey was none other than the transformed meat jelly. Come on, let's head into this town. I refuse to believe that the Heaven God Alliance will keep everything locked down forever. Eyes flashing coldly, Meng Hao rubbed his chest in a place where the flesh hadn't quite grown back yet. His cultivation base had been seriously injured because of the deadly battle. However, it wasn't so bad that he was limited to the mid-ancient realm, as the Heaven God Alliance presumed. He could still reach his peak power, but unfortunately, that could not be sustained for very long. I'm going to take advantage of this chance to let my wounds heal a bit more, he murmured. As the sun slowly dropped over the horizon, he sighed, and his face turned a bit grimmer. The first thing he had done after arriving on planet Luo River was to open the incense burner. However, what he had found inside was not what he had hoped for. Chu Yuyan's soul. Meanwhile, a flying shuttle was speeding along through the starry sky of the Heaven God Alliance. Countless magical symbols covered its surface, which formed together into the character Ming Chinese letter. This was none other than a Ming clan merchant ship. A young man could be seen in that merchant ship. He was handsome, with a fair face, and was currently standing there with head bowed and fists clenched tightly as the middle-aged man before whom he stood rebuked him coldly. Meng Chen, don't forget that you never should even have had this chance. It's only because of the kindness shown to me by your grandfather years ago that I managed to get you this spot. Don't forget your place. You'll just be a bodyguard here, but you need to cherish that identity. If you can just keep young Master Da happy, then your bloodline will have things much easier. So what if he arranged to have you spend some time with young Lord Feng of the Han clan? You feel wronged or something. Young Master Da already agreed. You're going to do it whether you want to or not. Chapter 12:21. A scholar taking the imperial examinations. Chapter 12:22. Storm clouds approach. Around the same time that countless cultivators in the Heaven God Alliance were combing the starry sky for Meng Hao, someone was passing through the barrier between the 8th mountain and the 9th mountain. Every step he took left him trembling, as if incredible pressure were weighing down on him. From the look of things, he had been traveling for a very long time to reach this point. It's not that much farther. It's too bad that with this body, passing through the barrier is quite a task. It was a young, handsome man whose eyes glittered as if with starlight and with a sense of enigmatic profoundness. It was none other than Jade. Meng Hao, the 8th mountain and sea is where you and I will become one. A strange smile could be seen on his face, and his expression was one of anticipation as he continued to struggle through the barrier. Meanwhile, back outside the Heaven God Alliance, rumbling sounds could be heard coming from one particular asteroid field. The asteroids were collapsing into pieces and, shockingly, countless bones were flying out from inside them. The rumbling continued, and the asteroids were destroyed one after another. Soon, the bones had accumulated to the point of being endless. Within those bones could be seen a man in a long black robe, sitting there cross-legged, his long hair swirling around him. He was gaunt, and yet terrifying ripples spread out from him in all directions. The ripples caused a good portion of the bones to slowly form together until they were a huge throne of bones, upon which the black-robed man settled. The rest of the bones converged next to the man to form 9 enormous bone giants. In the same moment that the 9 bone giants formed, the black-robed man's eyes snapped open. His cultivation base erupted with power, and his chi and blood surged. At the same time, a mark appeared on his forehead. This was the echelon cultivator of the 8th mountain, Han Qinglei. When he opened his eyes, the air around him distorted, and soon numerous figures materialized out of the void. They quickly dropped to their knees and kowtowed in front of Han Qinglei. At a glance, it was possible to see that there were dozens of such figures, all of them kowtowing. One by one, they transmitted various messages to Han Qinglei, reporting to him what had occurred in the 8th mountain and sea during his secluded meditation. Han Qinglei's face was expressionless. However, after hearing all of the reports, his pupils constricted, and he focused on one specific kneeling figure. "Did you say Meng Hao?" he asked in a voice that caused the starry sky to tremble. His gaze was like lightning, completely menacing as he stared at the cultivator who had brought the news. The man trembled, and instead of transmitting his messages, he whispered, "According to the news from the Heaven God Alliance and some other clues, the person who exterminated the Black Soul Society was definitely Meng Hao. This conclusion is also based on the report you provided about the windswept realm, young lord. In fact, the Heaven God Alliance has asked that you pay them a visit to confirm some information." Han Qinglei sat there silently, eyes closed as he recalled everything that had occurred in the windswept realm. He thought back to his encounter with Meng Hao, how he had been killed, and then how Meng Hao had saved him during the final battle. Although not much time had passed since then, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the windswept realm adventure had been one of extreme danger. Even an echelon cultivator like himself was shocked by it. So he actually came to the 8th mountain and sea. Han Qinglei smiled subconsciously. He actually felt no hatred toward Meng Hao, only a sense of competition. And the cultivators of the Heaven God Alliance are trying to track him down and kill him. Perhaps he can tolerate that, but as another echelon cultivator, I cannot. His eyes flickered icily. People who were not in the echelon couldn't possibly imagine the level of pride that echelon cultivators felt in their standing. As for Han Qinglei, he could accept Meng Hao being defeated or even perishing, but only at the hands of another echelon cultivator. For non-echelon cultivators to be hunting him down was something unacceptable. Snorting coldly, Han Qinglei smacked his hand down onto the throne of bones. Instantly, it began to rumble, transforming into a white beam of light that shot off into the distance. Time to go to the Heaven God Alliance. In response to his words, the other figures lurking in the starry sky began to power up and follow him. Soon, the entire group was on their way to the Heaven God Alliance. Meanwhile, back in the Heaven God Alliance, because of the enormous scope of the search for Meng Hao, eventually, the chosen of the various sects in the Heaven God Alliance all emerged and joined in. This included the Tao Child of the Heaven God Society. These chosen were very much like the chosen of the 9th mountain and sea, people who their respective sects had spent incredible resources on to develop them into powerful experts. Any one of them possessed battle prowess that far exceeded the level of their cultivation bases. In order to ensure that they didn't somehow get killed while training, they still had Tao protectors, even though they were already in the ancient realm. In fact, Tao protectors would guard them all the way to the Tao realm. In a short time, figurative storm winds arose in the Heaven God Alliance, like a huge vortex that sucked in cultivators from the far corners of the realm. Backslash. Despite the momentous state of affairs in the world around him, Meng Hao was living in relative tranquility. It was a peace and quiet that he hadn't experienced even in the eastern lands on planet South Heaven. For now, he had seemingly truly forgotten about being a cultivator and wasn't thinking about how he was the subject of a huge manhunt. Instead, he was fully immersed in the life of a scholar. The town had an inn where he sat beneath an oil lamp, reading. Occasionally, a smile would flicker across his face, and sometimes he would shake his head. He appeared to be completely immersed in the joy of reading. Every once in a while he would rise to his feet, grab a writing brush, and write something down off to the side. He was completely and fully a scholar, just like he had been all those years ago on Mount Dacheng. There's still half a month to go before the imperial examinations. Around midnight, he blew out the lamp and crawled into bed. From there, he could look out the window at the starry sky. Everything was quiet except for the faint sound of snoring that rose from various locations in the small town. I never passed the exams back then, but now I'm going to give it another shot. As he reminisced about his past life, he sighed. Eventually, he pulled out an incense burner, which was covered with layers of magical seals. Chu Yuyan's soul was in that incense burner, but it was not complete. More than half of it had dispersed, leaving behind nothing more than a discarnate soul. That discarnate soul was not enough to resurrect Chu Yuyan. Furthermore, if it entered the cycle of reincarnation as a discarnate soul, then she would no longer be herself. Instead, she would merely be one aspect of whoever she eventually reincarnated into. Meng Hao could not accept something like that. There's always a way. He closed his eyes, rotating his cultivation base to continue healing himself. At dawn, he packed his bags and led his donkey out of the inn stable. The innkeeper chatted with him the entire way, wishing him well as he mounted the donkey, opened up a bamboo scroll, and then headed in the direction of the capital city, which was about 7 days away. Meng Hao wasn't in a hurry. He rode his donkey along the public highway, resting at night, traveling when the sun rose. Days went by in which he enjoyed the scenery, passing by villages and farms. Although he hadn't planned this, his travels were like a cleansing that left him much more calm and tranquil. Beams of light occasionally shot through the sky overhead. Out in the starry sky, the cultivators searching for Meng Hao were getting more and more anxious. Despite having searched for Meng Hao for an extended period of time, they hadn't been able to turn up a single trace. Their only recourse was to send more people out to search. Planet Luo River was scanned with divine sense occasionally, but the Heaven God Alliance was huge, and it wasn't an easy thing to search for a single person. Gradually, the appointed time to unseal the teleportation portals approached. In fact, there was a bit of a backlash among certain factions in the Heaven God Alliance, who felt that locking down the entire alliance to search for a single person wasn't very appropriate. Patriarch Blacksoul wasn't willing to give in, though. Gritting his teeth, he personally went to the Heaven God Society. After he left, the old man who had issued the bounty on Meng Hao sat there cross-legged, personally sending his divine sense out to aid in the search. However, the Heaven God Alliance was an equally large place for him, and to search it required time and significant resources. Were it not for the hefty price paid by Patriarch Blacksoul, he would never have agreed to help. Time passed. As a cultivator, Meng Hao's journey was tranquil and enjoyable. It would have been a different story if he were mortal, considering the various dangers to be faced. At one point he encountered some bandits. The bandits had just sacked a merchant caravan and were in the midst of their burning, killing, raping, and plundering. As Meng Hao passed by, looked over at the bandits, and they in turn saw him. They immediately began to laugh heartily. One particularly burly man declared, "Look, a pretty little scholar, he's mine." Then he strode forward toward Meng Hao, a vicious expression plastered on his face, his eyes gleaming with lascivious intent. Meng Hao frowned, wondering how the 8th mountain and sea could have such debauched inhabitants. As the burly man neared, Meng Hao sighed, then looked up into the sky as if to check for witnesses before giving a cold harumph. It was a noise that no one except for the bandits could hear. To them, it sounded like thunder. Blood sprayed out of their mouths and they instantly toppled over. They weren't dead yet, just unconscious. Meng Hao didn't use any magical technique, just a snort, backed entirely by the power of his fleshly body. With that, he hopped off the donkey and picked up the nearest blade. Then he went from one unconscious bandit to another and dispatched them coolly and quickly. After that, he returned to the donkey, which had been waiting impatiently the whole time, and continued on his way. Several days later, a huge walled city appeared up ahead. This was the imperial capital of this empire. The imperial examinations that Meng Hao was so looking forward to would be held here in a few days. The days passed uneventfully, and soon it was time for the exams to begin. The entire capital city was bustling as students and scholars arrived from all over the empire to take the imperial examinations. Meng Hao was one of them. He left his donkey at the inn, straightened his clothes, then cleared his throat as he joined all of the other scholars as they headed to the exam grounds. There, A court official closely examined everyone before they entered to make sure they hadn't brought along anything to help them cheat. Eventually, Meng Hao was escorted to a small room, just big enough for him. A desk could be seen, upon which writing utensils were arranged neatly. Before opening the exam materials, Meng Hao washed his hands in a wooden basin off to the side, then took a deep breath. When the starting bell rang, he sat down in the chair and opened the exam scroll. As soon as he laid eyes on the contents, a smile broke out on his face. Chapter 12:23. Is this a dream? He didn't begin to answer the questions right away. He first closed his eyes, as if he were carefully considering how to answer. When his eyes opened, they shone brightly. He picked up the brush and immediately began to write down the first answer. In the same moment that his brush touched the paper, a righteous, noble aura suddenly appeared within the city, causing colors to flash in heaven and earth. At the same time, in the forbidden palace elsewhere in the city, the emperor sat there holding a go-piece in his hand. Sitting across the game board from him was a Taoist priest, a smiling old man with the air of a transcendent being. Suddenly, the Taoist priest's face flickered, and he looked in the direction of the exam grounds, an expression of shock on his face. One of the scholars taking the imperial examinations provoked a righteous, noble aura. Which one? The Taoist priest waved his finger, causing water-like ripples to spread out over the game board, which vanished, to be replaced by an image of the exam grounds. 1. I found a cool picture of a model of how the imperial examinations were set up in ancient China. Depending on the type of test, each test taker might have their own room, where they would take the test and even sleep overnight as necessary. Check out the picture here and the article here. The Taoist priest's gaze shifted, causing the view to pass through the exam grounds as he searched for what he was looking for. Soon, the image focused on a single room, where Meng Hao was currently writing characters down in flowing calligraphy. The Taoist priest looked at the emperor in amazement and then back at Meng Hao. He smiled. Is that kid special or something? The emperor asked. Special, very special, the Taoist priest replied, laughing. His eyes shone with excitement which only increased as he looked at Meng Hao. In all my travels through the years, this is the first time I've seen someone who could provoke such a righteous, noble aura. It's been decided. From now on he's a prize seedling for the righteous noble sect. The Taoist priest laughed heartily, then rose to his feet and strode in the direction of the exam grounds. 1. There is a lot of wordplay and room for interpretation with regard to the righteous, noble aura and the righteous noble sect. Without getting into too much boring detail, the righteous, noble characters could also be translated as vast, overwhelming, expansive. For reasons I won't get into now, I chose to go with the righteous, noble interpretation. Furthermore, the first character is Hao, the same character from Meng Hao's name. It was in almost the exact same moment that the old man in the Heaven God Society happened to scan the area with divine sense. His divine sense was in the Tao realm already, and had also been augmented by the Heaven God Society's ancestral treasure, making it incredibly powerful and increasing its range. In addition to that, he had spared no effort to boost it even further in his search. As it scanned planet Luo River, the entire planet vibrated. Meng Hao stopped writing for a moment and slowly closed his eyes. He had noticed the divine sense just now. Although it hadn't stopped specifically on him, he had the feeling that he had been detected. What a pity, I'm not even half done with the exam, he murmured. He looked down at the exam paper, then smiled casually. Ignoring the matter of the divine sense, he continued writing. Back on the 8th mountain in the Heaven God Society, the cross-legged old man suddenly opened his eyes. His face was a bit pale, but he waved his sleeve nonetheless. Instantly, hundreds of thousands of jade slips flew out from the 8th mountain, piercing through the void to head in all directions. The jade slips appeared in the hands of numerous cultivators, who then heard the voice of the old man speaking in their minds. The foreign cultivator who exterminated the Black Soul Society is currently on planet Luo River, taking the imperial examinations in the capital city of the righteous noble state. The jade slips were also specifically locked onto Meng Hao's location, so that any cultivator who held them could easily find him. Numerous figures began to speed in the direction of planet Luo River, all of them worried that they would be late, and that someone else would be able to apprehend the prize before them. Somewhere in the starry sky was a young man who appeared to be around 30 years of age, striding along with his hands clasped behind his back. The starry sky trembled as he walked along. Behind him, an enormous figure could be seen that bore the semblance of Heaven God, shining with boundless light. As the young man walked along, a jade slip shot up to him which he grabbed. Then his eyes glittered with viciousness. Smiling, he headed directly toward planet Luo River. In another location, a 3,000-meter blood mist surged through the starry sky. Inside were various powerful beasts, snarling as they struggled to free themselves from the mist. Soon, though, cracking sounds could be heard as their bodies collapsed, and they were absorbed into the blood mist. Suddenly, a jade slip flew through the sky and into the blood mist. Moments later, cruel laughter rang out. So they finally found him. Interesting, very interesting. The blood mist changed directions and headed toward planet Luo River. In a stretch of the starry sky not too far away from planet Luo River, a woman could be seen flying along. She looked like an utter barbarian, a coiled whip resting at her side and a wild look in her eyes. Suddenly, several gigantic pythons materialized around her, which then carried her in the direction of planet Luo River. The woman was swarthy but extremely beautiful. As she neared planet Luo River, she suddenly whistled. The sound wasn't very piercing, but the result was that all the snake-type creatures on planet Luo River suddenly began to hiss loudly. All it took was a brief moment for all of the Heaven God Alliance to be shaken into action. The first to mobilize of all were the sects on planet Luo River itself. How could they have ever imagined that the person the entire Heaven God Alliance was searching for was on their own planet? Planet Luo River was one of the 4 great planets in the 8th mountain and sea. In addition to the righteous noble sect, there were 3 other sects on the planet. Those 4 sects were the overlords of planet Luo River and occupied very important positions within the Heaven God Alliance. Currently, all 4 of those sects had mobilized and were headed toward the capital city. Bright beams of light shot through the air, and all of the snakes emerged from the forests and mountains, hissing loudly. They did nothing to harm the people, but rather headed directly toward the capital city. Colors flashed, the wind screamed, and the ground shook. However, Meng Hao remained in his little exam room, continuing to write down his answers. He truly wanted to finish the whole exam, and thus make peace with his failures in years past. After about 10 breaths of time passed, Meng Hao finished writing the final character. He took a deep breath and blew on the exam paper to dry the ink, then put the brush down. It's too bad I can't wait until the results come in. I definitely won't fail this time. It's too bad that either way, I won't be able to become a grand official to realize my dream of being super rich. With a silent chuckle, he stood up. At that point, a wind blew outside, and suddenly something burst into the exam grounds with speed that exceeded all normal cultivators. It was a donkey. As soon as the donkey entered the exam grounds, everyone stared with wide eyes. The official conducting the examination gaped in disbelief as the donkey head-butted the wall of Meng Hao's exam room, breaking it open and bursting inside. Meng Hao laughed and jumped onto the donkey's back, which brayed as it crashed through the opposing wall. Then, everyone watching was thrown into an uproar as the donkey then flew up into the air. An immortal. But why was an immortal taking the imperial examinations? Heavens, I can't believe I just took the imperial examinations with an immortal. Numerous cries of astonishment echoed up into the air. In almost the same instant that Meng Hao flew up into the air on the donkey, a bright beam of light closed in, which was none other than the Taoist priest. He had a strange look on his face. He had not received one of the jade slips and therefore didn't know who Meng Hao was. Apparently, he didn't care about that though, nor did he care whether or not Meng Hao was even a cultivator. "Hey little bro, don't go," the Taoist priest blurted. "Fear not, I'm Su Ran from the righteous noble sect. Are you interested in joining up? If you join our sect, you can have anything you want. The righteous noble sect has 1,000 scrolls of Taoist magic, 3,000 magical techniques, and countless disciples. We're ranked 7th in the Heaven God Alliance. We even occupy 30% of planet Luo River. Come on and join us. After you do, you can do anything you want." As soon as Meng Hao heard the man's words, his eyes went wide. However, before he could respond, countless shocking beams of light suddenly shot down from up above. "Meng Hao, it's Meng Hao. So it turns out he's here. Kill him and you can have Patriarch Black Soul as a slave for 1,000 years. Kill him." Numerous excited shouts could be heard, as no less than 1,000 cultivators began to converge on the area from all directions. Meng Hao's donkey shivered, then looked pleadingly up at him. Meng Hao chuckled and leaped off the donkey, which then turned into the meat jelly with a popping sound, and then flew into Meng Hao's bag of holding. "What a pity," Meng Hao said, shaking his head. A cold smile appeared on his face, and as soon as he did, his aura suddenly changed. No longer did he look like a scholar, but instead a demonic fiend bursting with energy. Everything rumbled as he waved his hand, causing the sky to fill with a boundless blood-colored light. A huge rift then opened up and the blood demon emerged, roaring as it charged the surrounding cultivators. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent. He would show absolutely no mercy to these cultivators of the Eighth Mountain and see who were trying to kill him. A flash could be seen as Meng Hao transformed into an azure rock, which blasted into the enemy cultivators like lightning. Immortal mountains descended, a violet moon flickered, and a sun began to suck in all the light in the area, then released it with explosive force. In the blink of an eye, dozens of blood-curdling screams could be heard echoing out as enemies fell out of the sky. Blood sprayed in all directions, falling down toward the earth in a rain of gore. Of the surrounding cultivators, a few hundred were wearing green Taoist robes. They didn't attack immediately, but instead began muttering, which then caused an astonishing explosive aura to build up that only they could see. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He couldn't see the aura either, but he could sense that whatever magic these people cultivated was very unique. It appeared to be a Taoist magic as distinctive as that of the Burning Incense Stick Society that he had encountered in the Ninth Mountain and Sea. 2. Meng Hao fought Zai Yixian from the Burning Incense Stick Society starting in Chapter 876. He used a type of magic that forced Meng Hao into an illusion. In the moment that Meng Hao noticed what they were doing, the Taoist priest was suddenly thrown into a rage. He strode forward and stood in front of the several hundred cultivators, then shouted, "What do you people think you're doing? Wreaking havoc on sect allies. You should be calling him Elder Uncle." As soon as the words left the man's mouth, the cultivators lurched to a stop and stared in shock. The old man leading the group stepped forward, smiled wryly at the Taoist priest, then clasped hands and bowed. "Elder grandfather, this man is Meng Hao." "So what if he's Meng Hao?" the Taoist priest replied, glaring. The old man hesitated for a moment, then thought about all the muddle-headed things the Taoist priest was known for doing, then quickly explained, "Meng Hao. He's, the one who exterminated the entire Black Soul Society." "Exterminated the Black Soul Society," the Taoist priest said, spinning around and looking at Meng Hao with an even stranger look than before. "Ha ha ha, as expected of my apprentice. Excellent. Wonderful. I've been annoyed with those bastards from the Black Soul Society for years now. You are obviously destined to be my apprentice. You haven't even formally paid respects to me as your master, and you've already solved one of my headaches for me." Chapter 12:24. Be a good kid, my little disciple, don't run. A strange expression could be seen on Meng Hao's face, but before he could say anything, the Taoist priest glared at the surrounding disciples of the righteous noble sect. "What are you standing around for? Can't you see that your elder uncle is being bullied? Why aren't you helping him?" The Taoist priest stamped his foot down, causing the air to rumble. The disciples of the righteous noble sect exchanged wry, helpless glances. The old man who was the leader of the bunch appeared to be on the verge of tears. He let out a long sigh, unsure of whether or not to attack Meng Hao. Even as he was going back and forth about what to do, the sound of a whistle could be heard high up in the sky. As it echoed out, all of the snakes on planet Luo River hissed loudly. The sound echoed about, and the clouds churned, revealing numerous cloud pythons swirling through the air toward Meng Hao. Simultaneously, countless arrow-like snakes shot up from the ground, eyes sinister, forked tongues flicking. It wasn't over yet, though. Up above in the sky, an even larger python began to descend. It glowed with brilliant light and even emanated an aura similar to that of a paragon. All of the cultivators in the crowd were completely shaken. As for Meng Hao, when he looked up, his eyes went wide for a moment, and then he actually smiled. "Finally," he murmured, "I get to see some of the local chosen." He was already itching to fight, so as soon as the python appeared, he instantly shot up into the sky, moving so fast a sonic boom echoed out. Relying only on the strength of his fleshly body, he slammed into the cloud pythons. By the time that they howled and they collapsed into countless pieces, Meng Hao was already bearing down on the paragon-like python. He quickly waved his hand, causing the essence of divine flame to roar out, transforming into a sea of flames capable of burning everything. In response, the huge python opened its mouth and blasted out a huge air channel, making it impossible for the sea of flames to touch it, then opened its mouth to shoot a beam of light toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao smiled coolly, then clenched his hand into a fist and punched out toward the python and its gaping maw. First fist, life extermination fist. As the fist sailed through the air, heaven and earth went wild with flashing colors. A massive wind sprang up and everything shook violently. The python let out a miserable shriek as the light shattered, and its body then collapsed into pieces. Meng Hao threw his head back and shouted. Although the sound of it wasn't extremely loud, as soon as it echoed out, the rest of the surrounding pythons began to tremble. Not daring to get any closer, they turned tail and fled. "Shut the hell up," someone said imperiously. It was the barbaric woman, riding on a five-colored beam of light that closed in on Meng Hao with incredible speed. The woman was quite pretty, despite her swarthy skin. She had a very unique air to her, making her look very different from any other female cultivator Meng Hao had ever encountered. Lady Dragonsnake. It's Lady Dragonsnake from the Dragonsnake Fusion sect. I can't believe she's here on planet Luo River. The Alliance's bounty on Meng Hao is just too enticing. It even caught the attention of the Dragonsnake Fusion sect. Or maybe it caught the attention of the ever-flamboyant Lady Dragonsnake herself. If she's here, then presumably the other 8 members of the 9 claws of the Heaven God are on their way too. As everyone discussed the matter, the old man from the righteous noble sect sighed, inwardly thanking Lady Dragonsnake for showing up and getting him out of the embarrassing situation. Now he didn't have to decide whether or not to attack Meng Hao. Looking at his master out of the corner of his eye, he couldn't help but smile wryly. Right now, the Taoist priest's eyes were shining brightly, and the old man knew that whenever that look appeared, the Taoist priest was about to do something very muddle-headed. Meng Hao looked at the woman closing in on him, and his eyes slowly narrowed. At the same time, a smile appeared on his face when he heard what the surrounding cultivators were saying about who she was. 9 claws of the Heaven God. They must be chosen from the Heaven God Alliance. Excellent. I've collected on most of my debts from the 9th mountain and sea, and now that I'm here, it's only right and proper to make a killing in the 8th mountain and sea too. Laughing loudly, he suddenly shot directly toward Lady Dragonsnake. Her pupils constricted when she realized how powerful he was. However, she didn't attempt to dodge out of the fight. Her right hand flickered with an incantation gesture, causing 5-colored light to explode out in all directions, transforming into 5 pythons which howled as they shot toward Meng Hao. At the same time, she waved her hand, summoning a string of bells. When she swung the string, melodic chiming could be heard. When that sound entered Meng Hao's ears, though, it was like the roaring of the highest heavens, and he even felt his psyche trembling. Meng Hao gave a cold snort. He had cultivated the Tao divinity scripture, so as soon as the psyche-shaking sound waves hit him, he sent his divine sense out, which transformed into an invisible tempest and smashed back against them. Lady Dragonsnake's face fell, and blood oozed out of the corners of her mouth. Alarmed, she fell back. Before she could do anything else, Meng Hao flashed through the air, transforming into an azure rock, which shot like lightning toward the 5 pythons. Of course, rocks are the nemesis of dragons and snakes, so as soon as its aura appeared, the 5 pythons immediately shuddered. The azure rock quickly closed in and slashed its claws toward them. Booms echoed out as the pythons, completely unable to fight back, were ripped to shreds. Meng Hao then closed in on the woman herself. Rock transformation. You're a disciple of the heavenly rock sect. The woman's face fell and she fell back, quickly performing an incantation gesture with her right hand. Then she spit out a mouthful of dark blood, which transformed into a blood-colored sealing mark. The sealing mark writhed and in the blink of an eye had transformed into a dragon. It was a dragon formed from black blood, which made this a black dragon. The black dragon kicked up a huge wind as it roared and shot toward Meng Hao. Is a magical technique like this really worthy of a chosen? Meng Hao said, shaking his head. If this was all she could do, this woman wouldn't deserve to have a promissory note and owe Meng Hao money. He took a step forward, clenching his right hand into a fist and unleashing a punch. It was his second fist strike, the bedevilment fist. As the fist rumbled through the air, the heavens seemed to teeter on the verge of collapse. The black dragon had just appeared but was already twisting and distorting. It let out a miserable shriek, as if it were about to collapse into pieces. In almost the same moment that Meng Hao spoke, Lady Dragonsnake rotated her cultivation base, causing more than 10 soul lamps to appear around her, more than half of which were extinguished. Within each of those soul lamps could be seen the image of a person meditating. All of them wore the same face as Lady Dragonsnake, except that from the waist down they were snakes. Suddenly, they opened their eyes and looked at the black dragon. 13 Dragonsnake augmentations, she cried in a piercing voice. A tremor suddenly ran through the black dragon and its energy redoubled. After that it tripled, quadrupled. In the blink of an eye, the black dragon's energy had increased by 13 times. Now it seemed absolutely, completely different from before. Furthermore, it even emanated faint traces of the Tao realm. Meng Hao was taken aback, but still shook his head. That still isn't going to cut it, he said. He was fed up with this fight already, so he immediately unleashed his third fist strike. God slaying. As soon as the god-slaying fist was unleashed, everything began to shake. The black dragon, which was now 13 times more powerful than before, let out a miserable shriek as its body was destroyed. The surrounding cultivators were shocked and looked over at Meng Hao with wide, astonished eyes. The Heaven God Alliance was wrong. The power he can wield is not that of the ancient realm. His injuries have healed. Before he was injured, he could wipe out the entire Black Soul society. Even Patriarch Black Soul himself received terrifying injuries. Even as everyone reacted with shock, Meng Hao strode forward toward Lady Dragonsnake and extended his right hand. His eyes glittered with an intensely cold light. These cultivators had come here to kill him, so it didn't matter if they were men or women. Unless they qualified to have a promissory note, Meng Hao would not go lightly on them. He closed in on Lady Dragonsnake, killing intent raging. Her face fell, and both hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture. Just as Meng Hao was about to grab her by the neck, she roared, and suddenly transformed into a ghost image. When she reappeared off in the distance, blood was oozing out of her mouth. Meng Hao said. In the moment that she had performed her teleportation, he had felt fluctuations of the Tao divinity scripture. He flashed through the air toward her again, and Lady Dragonsnake's face paled and filled with terror. Even as she backed up, she performed an incantation gesture and then fled via teleportation once more. His interest piqued. Meng Hao suddenly waved his finger, unleashing the 8th demon sealing hex. The woman didn't know why, but she suddenly lurched to a stop, and her eyes went wide with despair. Even as he closed in on her, all of a sudden, a withered hand appeared out of nowhere to claw at Meng Hao. Quasi-Dao, scram! Meng Hao instantly knew exactly what type of person this was. He waved his hand, causing the aura of the Paragon Bridge to erupt out. The instant the hand made contact with him, it shattered. An old woman staggered out into the void, looking at Meng Hao with an expression of terror. Coughing up blood, she shot toward Lady Dragonsnake, grabbed her, and fled. That old woman was Lady Dragonsnake's Tao protector, but even she was currently terrified. "Young lady, we must flee. This man isn't injured at all." Seeing that Lady Dragonsnake was fleeing, Meng Hao smiled, although it was an icy smile. He suddenly waved his hand toward the fleeing Lady Dragonsnake. "Call upon Karma to form a binding writ. Starting today, you owe me money." Immediately, Karma threads appeared above Lady Dragonsnake. Meng Hao then reached out and grabbed the brightest of the shining threads and then placed a sealing mark on it. Rumbling sounds could be heard as Lady Dragonsnake coughed up blood. Her heart was now filled with an indescribable dread, especially when she saw the glowing piece of paper floating down onto Meng Hao's palm. She suddenly felt as if she had lost something important, and her fear grew. It was at this point that a cold snort echoed through the sky, and a writhing blood mist descended toward Meng Hao. "Ah, another one," he said, chuckling. Instead of standing there waiting, he suddenly transformed into a prismatic beam of light that shot up into the sky. However, from a distance it looked like he was actually trying to flee. Just as Meng Hao was about to blast up into the sky and start fighting, the Taoist priest appeared in midair, beaming with a huge smile as he hollered, "Be a good kid, my little disciple, don't run."